Happy Thursday to you. It's George Brauchler on the George Show, 710 KNUS. About 11 years ago, almost to this moment, Aurora had a greater concentration of law enforcement officers in its borders than probably at any time in my lifetime. That means that we're talking about the Aurora Theater mass shooting that took place in the early morning hours of July 20th, 2012. I'm honored to have back on the radio with us a friend of the show, guy who was just the interim chief of police out here. It seems like 15 minutes ago, but he's back to living his best life. It's Dan Oates. Sir, thanks for joining us.
Morning, George. Happy to be here.
Where are you these days? Are you back in Miami, New York, some other country?
I'm semi-retired, living in Central Florida, just northeast of Orlando.
Okay, that's fantastic. And how's the weather?
The weather today is beautiful. About to play golf, so it's a perfect day so far.
Thank you for making time for us to do this. Dan, I unlike Columbine, which I think Columbine was kind of like that first of its kind major national news that everybody sort of absorbed at the same time. Aurora had that same impact at the time, but we have been inundated with so many other mass shootings since. As each year goes on and you look back and think, good God, man, it was 11 years ago. I think you were like 28 or something when this thing happened. What do you think about that?
Well, it's funny. I'm giving a couple of talks in September in Arizona to some police chief groups. And I was saying, we're preparing for that and thinking what's changed in the last 11 years. And here's what's changed. When our event occurred, it was still extraordinarily rare. Ours was in terms of number of victims, the largest mass shooting in U.S. history at the time. It's been eclipsed by any number of events, right. Las Vegas and everything else. And it was still a rarity. I mean, the international media descended on Aurora. And now when these events occur, because they occur with such frequency, it's a one and a half day news story. And major media doesn't really show up. If you watch CNN, the reporters talk about, this is the 15th mass shooting I've covered. I mean, it's so frequent now that it doesn't get the media attention, any of these events that, unless there's some extraordinary circumstances like Uvalde, they don't get the media attention that ours did 11 years ago because they're so frequent. And that's terribly, terribly sad.
What's your sense of how we end up here where we've got this many? What's the change?
Well, the availability of guns in our society is just, just out of control. That's one thing. I've noticed, I retired in 19 and then went back to Aurora in 22. And just in those couple of years, the availability and use of guns by young people under, truly aberrant circumstances seem to have shot up tremendously. And there doesn't appear to be any real serious effort by society to somehow control this behavior. So I think we're on a path. We're just going to continue to have these things happen with the frequency with which they are happening.
On this day, and you've had 11 of these now, 11 since. Mm-hmm. Where does your mind go? I mean, is it something you think about before you go to bed when you get up in the morning? Is it, hey, I'm living my own life, and then I realize, hey, this is where I was in Aurora on this day?
Well, there's a couple people that I reach out to just because it feels good. Jed Lanigan.
Of course,
who was in charge at night. Jed and I are pretty close, and I always touch base with him. I spoke to him yesterday. Carol O'Shea, who of course headed our victim services unit, and that, there's a story there that hasn't been told about how that unit suffered. They did extraordinarily great work, but at great personal cost in terms of the trauma that they endured. But the big thing is, I always return to, I think about the victims, as I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
We got to know families. We got to know the terribly tragic stories. And, behind every one of these incidents, there is horrible, horrible tragedy and heartbreak for families. And I don't think that gets covered enough in the media today. The trauma to our community, to trauma to those families, the trauma to every first responder was, off the charts. And, but I always sort of think about the victims. And there's a couple of victim families that I've gotten to know, and I always reach out to them on this day too. So,
well, we're going to have Tom Teves on. His son Alex, of course, was one of the 12 that was murdered in the theater. And, and just going back and forth with Tom a little bit last night, I mean, what he said is, I said, what would you want people to know? And he said, and he'll talk about this when he comes on, but he said, it never goes away.
Yeah.
You never get past it. When you look back on this day 11 years ago, what are, other than the victim part of this thing, I mean, what memories do you have of Aurora's response or that moment? I mean, talk us through that moment you were told, and sort of, there's nothing you could have done up to that moment, Dan, that could have prepared you for that moment. Do you know what I mean? Like, all the other things you've done have to pale in comparison to the size of that. What do you do?
Yeah, I'll give you two thoughts, one organizational, one personal. I couldn't have been prouder of what my cops did. And all you have to do is listen to the radio. And they were so large and in charge. And that huge decision by Steve Redfern, the young sergeant in the back of the theater, when we couldn't get the medical people to where the wounded were, to put them in patrol cars, send them to the hospitals. We transported, people should know this, we transported 27 critically wounded people who could not get themselves out of the theater. And all 27 of them lived because of that decision by that young sergeant about 8-9 minutes in, to send them to the hospital in patrol cars. And law enforcement learned from that. And if you watch some of the events that occurred afterwards, you see the same thing happening in, a couple of years later in Orlando at the Pulse shooting. They were literally putting people in pickup trucks because that's what they had to do to save lives. And of course, what emerged out of Aurora, of course, was the importance of tactical combat care. Every cop in America pretty much now has a tourniquet issued and is trained on stop the bleeding care. And the personal note, to this day, I still can't get over. I had so many feelings during that first 24, 48 hours that this is just surreal. And I was quietly fighting back the panic. Am I doing enough? In my role as a leader in the organization, what am I missing? What am I failing to do to get us through this crisis? And, I've spoken to many chiefs because there's now this perverse fraternity of police chiefs who have been through this. And they all have the same feeling is, as I'm going through this, what else should I be doing? What other decisions or directions, decisions should I make or directions I should be giving to get us as an organization through this in the best possible way? But it was, the only word I can use, the entire experience was surreal. I actually, when Lieutenant Daly met me at the front of the theater and told me what we were dealing with, I actually said to him, Mike, you got to give that to me again. Like my brain couldn't process what he had just briefed me on. And I had him repeat the entire message about 10 dead in the theater. We've got one gunman, we're looking for a second. It was life-altering experience for everyone involved and for me personally.
We're talking with Chief Dan Oates. He's the retired chief from Aurora, who was in command back on this day 11 years ago outside that theater, just at about the corner of Alameda and 225. As you're there dealing with all of this, and I just presume that there's a bit of pandemonium there, and not so much from law enforcement, but from everything else that's going on around there. And I remember there was some logistical issues with how do we get paramedics here. You talked about the response by Redfern, who folks may not remember is now the deputy chief of police up in Boulder. I mean, that dude could be a chief of police too. I mean, he's all world. But when you look back on that, how do you and when do you, and this is the prosecutor asking, start to make the transition from we're in the life-saving game and the public safety game to now we're in the criminal justice game and we're trying to put together some type of an investigation for the gunman once you know you've taken him alive?
Well, the short answer to that is Aurora is a very sophisticated police department with very, very talented people. And we were there about 20 minutes in. Once everyone was transported, now it was a criminal investigation and everything fell into place and we were able to manage that, and our record shows by, the conviction we got that we did a good job, in that regard. So, And we, of course, had wonderful partners. One of the first calls I made was to Jim Yacone, who was the FBI stack. We mobilized a ton of FBI resources. Andy Travers was the ATF SAC, a special agent in charge. He mobilized a whole bunch of resources. And, we got it done. I'm extraordinarily proud of the investigation that was done by Aurora PD and all its colleagues. And you, more than anyone, knows how critical that work was. But the other thing about these events, George, is more and more we capture live defendants. It used to be when these events occurred,
so right.
The bad guys are dead. Now we capture live defendants. And in Aurora, you felt it. There was this we had plenty of evidence, but, we had to defeat an insanity defense. And we couldn't rest, and no one felt comfortable until he got convicted 3 years later. We had to deliver justice for those families. And that is a huge burden. You can't screw one of these cases up. And that's part of, when I'm going to be lecturing or talking to the Arizona homicide investigators in September. And that's really my number one message is when this event occurs, if you have a live defendant, you've got to do everything right, because you get to know those families and you can't fail to deliver justice for them. You simply can't.
You've made some great points here, Dan. And one of them is, you're right. Up until it seems like this event, all these guys either died by their hands or by the good guys' hands, right? But now it seems like they're living by design. They're planning to outlive these mass murders. And we had that here with this shooter. He never had any intention of dying at the scene. I mean, not only his body armor, but he took that Valium, a Vicodin, like an hour before he left his apartment, so he wouldn't feel any pain when the cops threw him to the ground. I mean, this guy wanted to outlive this, and that makes it sound crazy. But the other part that you bring up that's true is when you take them alive, there's only one exit from that isn't either the needle or life in prison, and that is insanity. There's never going to be self-defense or intoxication or heat of passion. There's never going to be anything like that. It is always going to be insanity. So you're right. If you don't start planning for that thing before it happens and how you're going to respond to it, you can be a bit behind the eight ball. And we've seen this play out over and over again. The other things that I remember about this, and you can speak to this better than I can, Jim Yacone, of course, was all world for us with the support the FBI provided. But the story that I heard about Jim was that he played another role, which is that the Department of Justice had been in his ear, and maybe even the U.S. Attorney's ear early on, about, hey, is there a potential federal hook for this? And my understanding is Jim went to bat for us with DOJ. Talk about that.
He suffered that night, and I could see it in his face. He was getting phone calls from the White House and everything else, and there was tremendous pressure on him to treat this, at least initially, like a terrorism case, and i.e. a federal case. And Jim said to them, no, all the indications are this is a capital murder case in Colorado. Aurora PD has it, and we are going to provide support to them, but we're not capturing evidence and putting it on the classified side. Can you imagine if you had gotten the death penalty conviction, and then the years of discovery problems you would have had, if some of the evidence had been placed on the classified side in the FBI system? It would have been a nightmare.
It would have been a nightmare. It was challenging already. You may remember this. It was challenging already with the FBI's help when we sent things to the lab, because they have such strict protocols about when they can release things. We were coming up on certain discovery cutoff deadlines, and they were like, well, hey, we haven't had our last review. And we were like, don't care about your review. You got to send it back, man. We're going to get pinched here.
Yeah. So, no, Jim and his team, his was the first call I made. And, I said to Jim, I don't know what I have, but wake up everybody and get everybody in here. And my other worry when I called him was, I had always feared that, in the world of terrorism, that this is a low-tech way to attack America, is to have, getting into our country is not hard to do.
No.
Getting access to weapons is not hard. And some sort of coordinated attack where this could have been happening simultaneously across the country. So that's why I called Jim right away. But he and his team were tremendous in providing us with support, as was the ATF. So, we really relied on our federal partners, and they did a lot for us.
The other thing, and you and I have talked about this on air, but I'm just going to keep repeating it. I know that one of the hardest things for you, and the reason that you didn't end up getting to do it was as much my advice as anything else, was you wanted to talk to the community about the heroic acts of your men and women that worked for you that night. But because we knew where this case was going to end up, because the path it was on was always going to lead to this hyper scrutiny by the court and the public defender's office and all this, I asked you, please don't go out there and have these men and women talk about the great stuff they did. And I know that from a selfish standpoint, that was the right answer, but I can also see in your face, and I can understand how it hurt them as well to not be able to have that almost catharsis. Do you know what I mean? And being able to share with the community what they went through.
Well, you know more than I do from the trial. I mean, some of the first public comments by many of our cops were on the witness stand.
That's right.
And how emotional and difficult that was for them. And that was 3 years later. And you'll recall when it was finally over and the cops were afforded the opportunity to tell their story. Most of them, I can't do it. They chose not to. And, the heroism, I mean, they did everything right, George, everything. If you listen to the radio, you hear the teams going through the theater, checking, and the instructions from the bosses about what to look for, and then going through the theater, checking the second time, looking for possible other suspects. You recall early on, they determined where the suspect lived, and there was concerns about what was in the apartment. And
because he says behind the theater, when he's asked by your guys, I think it was Blue or Oviat or somebody says, hey man, did you booby trap your car? And he says, no, just my apartment. And I think they had that Scooby-Doo moment of, and then they tracked it down.
Yeah. So, no, ours was a textbook response. And by the way, well before we've really, as a profession, refined response and trained on response. Now, we had, in fact, done a lot of training in the year before that event on active shooters. We had put together a whole day of training. And, cops talked to me afterwards. I interviewed all 126 cops who were working that night and responded.
Wow.
I sat down with each of them individually. And a lot of them mentioned, how helpful our training had been. So I'm just very proud of our training staff too. So.
Well, I think that you're right about the response. There was a flawlessness to it that made the prosecution so much easier. I don't remember losing a single piece of evidence, either to process or some technical violation or violation of the law. I don't remember a single witness getting hemmed up on anything on the stand. I don't remember the defense being able to play off of any mistakes that they would sometimes try to emphasize that law enforcement. There was nothing like that in this case. It was, if I were ever going to be told earlier in my career, someday you're going to have this biggest giant case, what do you think the chances are it's going to go as smoothly as it did from the presentation standpoint? I'd say 0. I mean, even the smaller cases don't go smoothly, but this one went about as smooth as it could have been. And it was because of Aurora. And frankly, this, and I know you're not big for hearing the compliments, but it started way before that event, and the training and the execution and the trust and the leadership and all that. That's what led to those moments that made this. And folks won't appreciate this, but I know you will. 12 deceased and 70 attempt murder victims. We got off light compared to what he wanted to do. We got off light.
Yeah. If he had been more capable with his weaponry, he could have done a lot more damage. So
he brought 700 rounds of ammunition with him, Dan. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, listen, I want to take you away from this talk and get you back onto the golf course. Thanks for making time with us, and of course we'll stay in touch. Thanks, Dan Oates.
Yeah, and George, always good talking to you, and you're one of my heroes for how you handle this whole thing. And it's a day of remembrance, and to everyone who's listening, think about the victims and their families. So.
That's Chief Dan Oates. He's retired. He was the former Aurora police chief during the horrible events of 11 years ago. Dan, thank you so much, sir. Hey, we're going to cut away for a break. When we come back, another friend, Jaclyn Schildkraut. She is somebody who is trying to make sense of all of this, not just Aurora, but all around the country. I just don't know anyone that has swallowed as much of this stuff as she has, but with a bigger goal in mind, and that is to improve responses and policies and how we deal with stuff like that. We're going to have an opportunity to talk with her when we come back. Stick around. George Brauchler, 710 KNUS.
Imagine the lifelong impact of a journey to the Holy Land, surrounded by like-minded travelers. Picture yourself stepping foot in iconic locations right out of history. With nationally syndicated radio hosts Dennis Prager and Mike Gallagher, you'll gain firsthand understanding of the spiritual and political importance of this vital region.
Hi, it's Mike Gallagher here. I hope you'll join Dennis Prager and me on an amazing journey through Israel in October 2023.
Discover Israel's vibrant culture and why this nation is such a strategic partner for the United States. Join Dennis Prager and Mike Gallagher on this life-enriching Israel tour, October 25th through November 3rd, 2023. For more information, call 855-565-5519 or visit standwithisraeltour.com.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
George Brauchler back with you here, 710 KNUS. Billy out of the studio today and tomorrow. Big Cat's going to go see Tears for Fears. He needed to stretch and rest up and get himself super caffeinated to be able to stay up past 6 p.m. In his place, Geronimo behind the glass, looking a lot like Ted Lasso at the moment. Apparently, Blake called that out. Listen, normally we would be doing things like the Thorpe Report and You Choose the News, but with Billy out and today being July 20th, by the way, big thanks to Dan Oates, the retired chief of police from the Aurora Police Department, who led the response and ultimately the investigation, if you will, not the lead detective, but the agency through the investigation of the Aurora Theater massacre that took place 11 years ago this morning. It just made sense to me that if we were going to have a show every year where we could at least carve out a couple segments to remember those who had been taken from us and impacted most by this, I wanted to do that. But I also think it's a great jumping off point to have a conversation about this epidemic of mass shootings and sort of some of what we're doing now to try to address them, if not prevent them, how to respond to them. So I wanted to bring up a friend we got to meet over mass murder, if you will. And I have had the opportunity to work with Jaclyn Schildkraut for a bunch of different things. But in this particular case, she's doing something I think that is not only important, but could do great things down the road when these things keep happening. Jaclyn, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, do us a favor first off. Tell us about you. And I know you want to start with the professional stuff, but honestly, everyone listening to the show knows I go back further than that. Tell us where you grew up, where you went to high school, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I actually grew up in South Florida in the Parkland community, more specifically Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where we had a shooting on February 14th of 2018. Was supposed to be my high school. I actually went to a magnet program instead, but my brother went to Stoneman Douglas. My friends went to Stoneman Douglas. And then I actually, for college, went to Orlando, which in 2016, which was where Pulse was. So I seem to find myself in a number of communities that unfortunately have experienced these tragedies.
Well, so what was the path that led you to becoming an expert, if you will, on this mass shooting stuff?
You know, it's really interesting. It's not something I ever thought I would do. I can remember where I was when Columbine happened, and I remember where I was when Virginia Tech happened. And it was actually Virginia Tech that really sort of propelled me into this. My mother used to talk about defining moments, and for my generation, those are two pretty significant defining moments. And so when Virginia Tech happened, actually, one of my friends and I decided to throw this really big charity party and give all of the money to the Hokie Memorial Scholarship Fund, which unfortunately was a great plan that just did not work out. I actually went like $10,000 in debt.
Oh my good Lord.
I know, but it was, everyone else had fun at the party except me. And so the next day at that point, I'd taken a break from college, just wasn't the right thing for me. And the next day I went back to school and was like, I need to do something. Like, I've never failed at anything I literally tried to do. And I went back to school, and here I am.
So now you were also at SUNY Oswego, because you had me out there and I got to talk to a bunch of different classes out there, which was cool. And now you have transitioned, at least temporarily, from SUNY Oswego to a different project that leads us to have this conversation today. Tell us about that.
Yes, as of February this year, I am the executive director of the Regional Gun Violence Research Consortium at the Rockefeller Institute of Government, which is a very prestigious public policy think tank here in New York. And so the consortium was actually started in response to Parkland by our governor and several other states' governors together. So we represent 8 states and territories. And I've had the opportunity to be part of this amazing group of more than 50 of the leading gun violence researchers in this nation since its inception. Last year, I was named the interim executive director, and this year I got to take it over full time. So it's been a very interesting experience.
Now, when we talk gun violence, I mean, and tell me how you define it, because one of the things that I notice is we suck into that definition suicides, regardless of age. And in my opinion, it changes the conversation a bit because it makes the numbers reflective of something different than what we were experiencing here on this 11-year memorial, I guess, of this event. It's a little bit different. How do you guys define it out there?
Well, I think when you think about gun violence, it's harms that are caused by a firearm. And certainly when we look at things like official statistics, they capture things like, fatalities, injuries, accidental deaths. There's data sources for discharges. They do encompass suicide as well as homicide. I think the really important thing when we're looking at gun violence as, a broader phenomenon is to your point, recognize that there's so many different ways in which gun violence occurs. We have community gun violence, we have, individual gun violence, we have homicide, we have suicide. We have all of these different forms of gun violence, and there's not going to be one lens that we can address all of it through. There's not going to be one solution that's going to fix all of it. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to work in this group, is because we have people who are experts on all different types of gun violence. So there's a group of us that look at mass shootings. There's a group that looks at, epidemiology and public health responses and the like.
We're talking with Jaclyn Schildkraut. Can you, Jaclyn, tell me, by the way, what's that title again? It had a lot of words in it.
I'm the executive director of the Regional Gun Violence Research Consortium at the Rockefeller Institute of Government.
So, geez, have you guys thought of making the letters into a word like Edrica or something that's just easy to say or something like that?
We do actually call the consortium the RGVRC.
Even that is a lot of letters for a guy like me. We're just going to call you the czar of gun violence stuff for now. In terms of the mass shootings piece, and I know you've been researching this, you've been covering this. I know you go to some of the same conferences I go to because I run into you at some of these things, and you've gone to way more than I've gone to. What can you tell us about mass shootings in America over, let's say, the last, I don't know, or since Columbine? Like, what are we seeing? Is there some trend that we're seeing? Are there some statistics that you talk about to folks where they're like, dang, I didn't know that?
Yeah, one thing I really want to, kind of say, of course, with today being such an important day for so many of your listeners, is the loss of one life to gun violence, whether it's a mass shooting or any other form of gun violence, is absolutely one too many. One of the things I think that we don't do very well in this country is respond to things in context. We have very emotional responses, which is obviously justified given the subject matter. When we think about mass shootings, and I know that this is a kind of a weird statistic for your listeners being in Colorado, these are actually one of the rarest forms of gun violence. Like, when we look at all of the crimes that are known to law enforcement, homicide, just homicide regardless of weapons, makes up 0.1%. And then when we look at mass shootings, we're looking at like less than 0.1% of 0.1%. So it's a very, very small number, but it's the one that captures the most attention.
True.
And so I think it's really important that, you know, we also understand that mass shootings are, when we think about them, like Aurora, like Columbine, these are premeditated crimes. Somebody doesn't wake up on a Tuesday morning and say, I'm going to go do this. And that's very different than other forms of crime, let's say, or gun violence, let's say, where a fight escalates and there happens to be a gun present and someone pulls it and they get shot.
Something more spontaneous or in some cases even passionate.
Exactly. And so I think it's so important to understand that when you have that window of premeditation, you also have a much greater opportunity to prevent it. We do know that as rare as they are, mass shootings are increasing, you know, incrementally year over year. We know that the likelihood of victimization is incredibly low. You're actually more likely to obviously get hit by a car, die of a heart attack, all these other types of, you know, fatal causes. But they're the ones that get us talking about gun violence and what we can do.
How many have we had this year?
That actually is a great question that depends on who you ask. You know, one of the challenges of this research is we don't have a national definition of what mass shooting is. So we also don't have, you know, one uniform data source. So one of the sources that gets cited the most often is the Gun Violence Archive, which captures any incident of a shooting where 4 or more people are shot. And so what that means is that there's contextual factors that aren't being accounted for. So for instance, Aurora would be treated the same as a gang shooting where 4 people are shot, or a family murder, even though there's very qualitative differences to how you would prevent those things. So if you're looking at something like the Gun Violence Archive, we're up into the 200 or 300s at this point of the year. When we think about events like Aurora, we're closer to 5 or 6 this year.
When you analyze these things, and I want to get into the victim work that you're doing, but when you analyze these things, do you also assess it from the firearm used?
We do. Most commonly, mass shooters, like pretty much 3 to 1, use a handgun. And it's really interesting because obviously a lot of our regulations or responses after a mass shooting, you know, tend to focus on the firearm, but more specifically assault weapons. And I think the reason that is because we know that the semi-automatic rifles tend to be correlated with higher victim counts, both fatalities and injuries. They do very different damage patterns than a handgun, but 3 to 1 handguns are used.
Isn't that interesting? And when you talk about number of victims, is there any, you said there's correlation. Do you have any numbers already stuck in your head? I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this.
You did not tell me you're asking that.
I'm sorry. You don't, just say you don't.
That's...
It's my fault for setting you up for failure.
No, actually, your timing is really good, though, because I just so happen to have the latest iteration of our policy brief here and right in front of me that actually has that information. So on average, when an assault rifle is not used, so like a handgun is used, you typically will have 2.9 or just under 3 fatalities and just over 3 injuries. When an assault rifle is used, it's right around 6 fatalities and 12 injuries. So it's more than double.
Isn't that interesting? And do you ever have any of these things that you keep track of that are done by non-semi-automatic weapons, like a revolver or a bolt action rifle or or anything else, a pump action shotgun?
Yeah, so we do code for the presence of, different types of weapons. We don't necessarily get that granular at this point.
Sure.
But we do know that, I'm just scrolling here really quickly. And of course we have to be mindful of the fact that some perpetrators do use multiple weapons, but
True.
in 75% of shootings, at least one handgun is used. In about 30% of shootings, at least one rifle is used, and that could be semi-automatic bolt action, lever action. And then in about 15% of cases, a shotgun is used.
Interesting.
So yeah, handguns are far more common. And I think that, speaks to the fact that, they're smaller, they're more concealable. If somebody is trying to avoid security or detection, it's a lot easier to do that with something that they can conceal under their clothes than something they have to bring in a bag or, have a trench coat or something like that.
Tell us, as we wrap up here with your time, I know how busy you are out there. Tell us about the project you're working on involving trauma and victims of mass shootings, and maybe how the listening public out there can help.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I have to thank you as well on the air, for helping me with this project as an advisory board member, because you've just been so invaluable. I've spent a lot of time in communities that have been impacted by mass shootings. I think I might have seen you in Colorado once or twice. And, I've come to get to know a lot of survivors. And one thing I've always heard through these more informal conversations is, the people who make the decisions about what we need after shooting, like resources, really have never experienced what we have experienced. And so back in 2017, before our shooting in Parkland and before Las Vegas, I sort of set out to ask them what they needed, because that seemed really logical to me. If you want to know what somebody needs, just ask them. And so I interviewed 40 survivors of mass shootings. The first paper that came out of that research was on Columbine, actually. Yeah. And that ended up getting picked up by the Mass Casualty Commission in Canada and served as a basis for a report to support their community after their mass casualty incident in 2020. And so recognizing that obviously there's a lot of perspectives out there beyond 40 people, we launched a survey earlier this year to really try to understand the experiences of mass shooting survivors, again, with that end goal of informing policy to make sure that people are getting the resources they need. Your listeners can learn all about the project at supportingmassshootingsurvivors.com. If they're interested in participating, we would love to highlight their perspectives. It's 100% anonymous. And the most important thing is that we're elevating the voices and experiences of survivors.
Would you tell us the website again, Jaclyn, and just 2 more times, just nice and slow, so people can track that thing?
Absolutely. It's supportingmassshootingsurvivors.com. If you need the front part, it's HTTPS. We made sure it was secure. But yeah, supportingmassshootingsurvivors.com. And, if you know somebody who has been impacted, if you're a community member who has witnessed, unfortunately, the sights and the sounds, and that created issues for you, if you were there, we use a very broad definition of survivors, because we think that everybody who has been touched by mass shootings in a direct way, is important, and their voices need to be elevated.
Jaclyn Schildkraut is the executive director of the Regional Gun Violence Research Consortium. That's RGVRC at the Rockefeller Institute of Government. Whoo, take a breath. Thanks for coming on, Jaclyn. I know you and I will be in touch, continuing to work on this great project that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll talk with you soon. Hey, all important stuff for us to talk about and to consider. I thought that was fascinating, by the way. I think G and I looked at each other at the same time when she said, yeah, it's 3-to-1 handguns over rifles. You would never know that from the coverage in the media. You would have presumed that every single mass shooting was always some type of quote unquote assault rifle or something like that. 3-to-1. That's super impressive. I did not know that statistic. Hey, listen, we're going to cut away for a break. We're only going to have a little bit of time before we get to the top of the hour. We'll shift gears. We'll get back to this one, though. It's an important day for me and for the community out here. It is 11 years since a mass murderer took his 4 firearms and 700 rounds of ammunition to a theater at the corner of 225 and Alameda and tried to murder hundreds of human beings. We'll do our best to try to honor them and remember that day here. It's George Brauchler on The George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brauchler back with you here, 710 KNUS. Sorry to be so quick to it, but I wanted to get John on the phone. John has called in from, I think it's Iowa. Maybe that's just your phone number. John, you're on 710 KNUS. What do you think?
Well, yeah, we're in Pella, Iowa. And I think the problem is the people. We have taken the 10 Commandments out of circulation. We've taken God out of the picture. These people that are shooting other people are trying to glorify themselves. And that gives them power over other people. And that's what their satisfaction is. They've been brought up with no regard for human life.
Well, and I don't know if that's accurate. I know that, for instance, the Aurora Theater shooter had mom and dad, pretty typical nuclear family. They had their own, both parents worked. Mom was a nurse, if you're talking about caring for life and all that. But he did have some mental illness. Definitely not insane, not by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely had some mental illness. And I wonder how much of that is a factor in all of this.
Well, every case is different, I'm sure. Everybody has a different reason for doing something. But, the basic point, I think, is that there's something that is wrong with the person that goes out and kills people he does not know.
Of course there's something wrong with him.
That's just incredible to me. And the big thing wrong is he has no fear of a higher authority. No fear.
I think they also don't fear the consequences coming out of the system here. I mean, we know that the mass shooter in Aurora, and John, thank you, man. I got to go because we're out of seconds here. But we know that the shooter there, the only thing he feared was general population and being put to death. He wanted to live. Those are the only things he was concerned about. And now he's in solitary confinement for the rest of his life. Seems kind of unfair. Hey, listen, we're going to change gears when we get to the top of the hour. We're going to talk to you about something explosive that wasn't covered by the mainstream media. Shocker. George Brauchler, 710 KNUS. Welcome to hour 2 of 4 right here on the George Show 710 KNUS. I'll be with you till 10 o'clock. Then Charlie Kirk takes over, little Dennis Prager at 11, Gorka at 1, and then we go live and local with Deb Floor right back here at 3. Deb, by the way, going to cover for me tomorrow. I'll be out just tomorrow. And then look, spoiler alert, I'll be in on Monday, but then I'm gone on some military stuff Tuesday through Friday. So I'll be with you today and Monday. Otherwise, it's Deb. And then I think next week, it's a smattering of superstars named Pete and Jeff Hunt, of course, and John Caldera will all be in covering for me for those 4 days that I'm off doing the heavy lifting in uniform. I'm kidding. It's not super heavy lifting, but it is something that takes me out of the state and out of the country for a little bit, but I'll be back on that following Monday as well. So, and by the way, Stephen Tubbs, 4 to 7 this afternoon. Listen, something took place yesterday that did not get nearly the attention it should have received from the mainstream media, and for obvious reasons. Now, as you know, I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy. I push back as hard on those. I don't care if it comes from the right or the left. I'm just not a big guy for taking an A and a B and concluding everything between C and Z. I can't get there from here. I'm not a guy that says where there's smoke, there's fire. But, oh, by the way, I know who also started the fire. I know who the arsonist is. I mean, I'm just not built that way. I've got that prosecutor mindset. You can get me there, but you're going to have to show me the evidence. So we have for a while now been dealing with the accusations that Hunter Biden has received preferential treatment. The Wall Street Journal did very light covering of the plea deal that it looks like Hunter Biden is going to receive. Obviously, the importance of the connection to Joe Biden is big, right? Because Hunter Biden has all access to all of these deals across the world globally that he is just simply not qualified to get. I mean, outside of who his father is, there's no chance Burisma's giving him the money it gives him. There's no chance that these Chinese companies are doing any business with him or any of his colleagues. It's just not going to happen without his connection to Big Dad, who was not only a longtime senator from Delaware, but the vice president under Barack Obama, and now the president of the United States. And so you fast forward to this investigation that had been going on for some time now. It was being run, and we were told to find some solace and confidence in this. It was being run by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney out of Delaware. And in fact, when Merrick Garland was questioned by Congress about how can the American people trust an investigation that doesn't have a special prosecutor associated with it, instead it has somebody that is going to be influenced by the Biden administration and the DOJ leadership, Attorney General Garland assured us that this guy in Delaware had unfettered decision-making authority and that he would be able to do X and do Y and do all of these things. And lo and behold, we end up with this deal, which is going to be for like some misdemeanor tax violation, a couple misdemeanors, and some type of diversion or deferred judgment, if you will, on a gun charge. And instantly, there are people crying foul, saying, whoa, 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 that seems like such a sweetheart deal. That's not my gut reaction to it. I'm like, wait, slow your roll. Let's hear what DOJ has typically done in these circumstances. That's one aspect of it. How does it compare to how other people similarly situated have been treated? That's one indication. Well, I've heard stories from a bunch of different people that, well, a lot of people go to jail on the gun charge. And so one of the examples that was given was a rap star at the time. But I looked at it and I thought, that's not a good comparison because that dude had multiple violations of the law before. And Hunter Biden had never been convicted. I'm not saying he didn't commit crime. I'm saying he hasn't been convicted. That matters to a prosecutor and to a judge in imposing a sentence. So I'm keeping my powder dry. I'm waiting. Well, lo and behold, man, something happens yesterday. I know Fox covers it, lightly touched upon or hinted at by the other mainstream media folks. But I got to tell you, it's pretty explosive stuff. There were 2 IRS investigators, and these aren't just like your run-of-the-mill hired off the truck 2 weeks ago kind of IRS investigators. These are the folks that are part of like the equivalent of special forces or SWAT for the IRS. And they were investigators on the allegations involving Hunter Biden. And there was two of them that testified. They're called whistleblowers now. One of them is a guy named Ziegler, Joe Ziegler. He's an IRS special agent. And I think he was valuable in that he provided a lot of information about the concerns that he had during the course of the investigation. Part of me thinks that some of the reason he was carted out there in part wasn't just the whistleblower thing, but he went first because he's a registered Democrat. And he's a gay man married to another dude, as if those things would matter. And what I really appreciate and respect about his testimony is he pushes back on that and says, whoa, I'm no more credible because of my political affiliation and the fact that I'm married to a man than the dude sitting next to me. And that dude sitting next to him was a guy named Gary Shapley. Now, Gary Shapley isn't just a special agent. He's an IRS supervisory agent. And this is the dude that you call in for all the big international stuff. I think he had at one point in his testimony, and I listened to the testimony, folks, and I recommend if you have time today, go out and do it. Just put it on the little YouTube on your phone and let it play while you're driving around and listen to it in your car speakers. Get through the opening statement garbage until you get to these two witnesses, until you get to Ziegler and Shapley. I don't care what Comer says. I don't care what Jim Jordan says. I don't care what what's his name says, the ranking member of the Dems. That stuff is largely irrelevant. But get to Ziegler, get to Shapley. And you hear some things where you're like, wait a minute. I get it now. I mean, this isn't just about the fact that this guy got some sort of a sweetheart deal in terms of his tax evasion and the gun stuff. It's bigger than that. And when I say it's bigger than that, I want you to understand, I don't conclude guilt or this is all a settled fact, and neither do these guys based on their observations and their testimony. But what they're highlighting here is, dang, we need to do more digging because it sure looks like the Biden administration was involved in manipulating the investigation. And the reason that's important is because if you manipulate the investigation, then it doesn't matter if the Delaware U.S. attorney has the ability to charge what he wants, which, by the way, he didn't either. But if you can manipulate the investigation and limit what information comes into the IRS or the FBI or DOJ or into the U.S. attorney's office, then you can shape the decision-making of that U.S. attorney. But it's more than that. So I asked G to go out there and find me this one particular segment. Now, I want you to listen to this. This is the testimony of IRS supervisory special agent Gary Shapley. He goes through his background. I'm not going to play that, but this clip is a minute and a half, and he tells you from his expert vantage point some of the huge problems with the narrative that have been pushed out thus far about how great this investigation was and about how trustworthy the decision-making by the U.S. attorney was. Listen to this right here.
In this country, we believe in the rule of law, and that applies to everyone. There should not be a two-track justice system depending on who you are and who you're connected to. Yet, in this case, there was. Based on my experience, I'm here to tell you that the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office and Department of Justice handling the Hunter Biden tax investigation was very different from any other case in my 14 years at the IRS. At every stage, decisions were made that benefited the subject of this investigation. For example, prosecutors concealed contents of Hunter Biden's laptop from investigators. DOJ slow-walked steps to include interviews, serving document requests, and executing search warrants. Warrants that were ready as early as April of 2020, but were delayed until after the November 2020 election and never pursued. Investigators were not allowed to follow up on WhatsApp messages from Hunter Biden's Apple iCloud backup, where he suggested he was sitting next to his father. Assistant United States Attorney Leslie Wolf cited the optics of executing a search warrant at President Biden's residence as a deciding factor for not allowing it, even though she agreed that probable cause existed. Prosecutors instructed investigators not to ask about the big guy or dad when conducting interviews. The Biden transition team was tipped off about interviews the night before the investigation went over, a fact my FBI counterpart confirmed to this committee in recent testimony, where the result was that only one witness spoke to investigators that day.
That's just his initial foray into the problems with this. Now, and by the way, you can text us at 710knus.com, 710KNUS app. We're, of course, on the Rumble, on the YouTubes as well. One texter here, I think concerned that somehow my highlighting this testimony, which sounds credible to me, is somehow inappropriate. And so here's what goes on. It says, how do you know what his qualifications are? I presume that was a reference to these guys that were testifying. They testified to their qualifications. And, maybe it's Hunter Biden's. Nobody has ever said Hunter Biden is an expert in anything energy or Ukraine related or that part of Europe. This is a dude whose greatest qualification is his last name. That's what it appears. And then another text from same texter, that U.S. attorney was put there by Trump. So where's the issue? Well, now you've just heard the issue, right? This dude wasn't allowed to make decisions on a full investigation, and he wasn't allowed to make decisions, if you listen to the testimony of Shapley, without the influence of Mother Justice over him. Do you know that the decision-making, Shapley and Ziegler both say, we recommended, and we were on the phone with the U.S. attorneys from Delaware, from Washington, D.C., and from California, because they had venue over different aspects of these crimes. They said they were on the phone with all of them. They recommended felony charges. Every single one of those U.S. attorneys involved agreed with the recommendation of felony charges. And then guess what? It doesn't happen. Well, how is that possible? If they're the ones in agreement, how does it happen that they don't? Because someone above them said no. They said in the decision-making, if you listen to Shapley's testimony, in the decision-making of the U.S. attorney in Delaware, it was DOJ, Biden-appointed DOJ folks that were in on the discussions about what the charges should be. Now, let me tell you, from the standpoint of a local district attorney, if you get off of a case because there's a conflict, and I did, you can't have any more contact with that DA about what the charges ought to be, what the plea bargain ought to be. And I'll give you a perfect example. In STEM, there was a security guard inside the school, wasn't supposed to be armed, but was, in violation of the agreement with the school and in violation of the law. He carried a gun onto school property. That's a violation of the law. And yet he still stopped the 16-year-old shooter, murderer. A lot of other things took place, some good, some bad with this guy. But nonetheless, there was a crime there. That crime gets brought to our office. Instantly, I recognize this dude's a witness in the case. I don't care as much about his crime as I do, of course, the two murderers and the would-be mass murderers. So I can't prosecute a witness at the same time that I'm prosecuting the case that they're a witness on. So I reach out down to Dan May, who is the great former district attorney for the 4th Judicial District in El Paso County. And I go, Dan, I got one for you. Here's what I know. I'm sending you the investigation. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. That's how a special prosecution works. And so when Dan goes through whatever investigation Dan does and he talks with law, I'm not part of that. He doesn't call me and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking of doing. He calls up and said, here are the decisions that I've made, just giving you a heads up before we go public with them. That's how special prosecution works. And so here, if you listen to Ziegler and Shapley, both of them are committed to the idea that there should have been a special counsel appointed here in this case. But we were assured by Attorney General Merrick Garland that was unnecessary because, like this texter said, we had this guy Weiss, who was appointed by Trump to be the U.S. attorney for Delaware, and he was given all the decision-making authority in the world. And now we know from these two guys who were participants in the investigation and the discussion about the charging, that wasn't the case. Weiss honestly needs to be brought back in to answer some of these questions. But Texter, you're wrong here. Weiss said he had full authority. It doesn't matter what authority he may have had if he was denied the ability to get a full investigation. And so what Shapley says is they slow rolled out the warrants involving Hunter Biden. Why would you do that? What's the benefit of slow rolling those warrants? How about this? They couldn't follow up on anything involving the text and stuff they found off of his phone involving claims that dude was with the big guy, that he was with his dad when he was making these demands of these foreign entities. Did you hear that even though the U.S. attorney who could have made the decision, the DOJ official that could have made the decision to execute a search warrant on on President Biden's home, they chose not to because of the quote unquote optics? Why in the world would optics matter there? It didn't seem to matter when it came to executing a search warrant on Mar-a-Lago, although I will say this, they did not publicize the execution of that search warrant. Trump did that himself. But how in the world do you decide that for optics, we're not going to execute a search warrant on the president's home? They couldn't follow up on any of the references, to the big guy. They couldn't follow up with any of the witnesses they interviewed. And the Biden election team, the campaign team, got tipped off to the investigation and the different things that happened. It doesn't matter if Weiss said he had full authority. He didn't have full information. And we know from Shapley and we know from Ziegler that he didn't have the ability to exercise that authority without the influence of the people above him in the Department of Justice. So I'd love to see Weiss come back in. So same texter. I watched it. I didn't watch it. I put, just like I told you to do, I put it on YouTube on my phone and I listened to this thing. And then he says, so you take their word with no cross. I take their word for what it's worth right now. Yeah, I'd love there to be cross-examination. I know they had the opportunity to be questioned by members on the committee. Did you hear anything that suggested that they were lying or manipulating the information? I didn't hear anything like that. Now, some of the stuff that went on in that thing was a little redunculous, like the MTG stuff, the Marjorie Taylor Greene stuff with the porn and showing the pictures. That was just unnecessary. Even if the questions themselves might have been relevant to some crime that was never investigated that he committed, and I think that is relevant. The whole picture thing, I mean, that was just sensationalist. It was meant to be scandalous, and it was. It was meant to be attention-getting, and it did get attention. But man, it doesn't make this seem serious to me. The stuff that Shapley and Ziegler testified to, that the mainstream media, can you imagine, by the way, if these same two cats had come out to testify about Trump's manipulation of the Department of Justice or the potential influence that DOJ had over some claimed independent U.S. attorney that was an Obama holdover or something that was investigating something? Can you imagine? It would be a 60 minutes, 3-hour special. There would be CNN would be camped outside of the hearing room. We would have Shapley and Ziegler. There would be books, which both these guys are like, we're not writing books. We're not doing any of this stuff. I'm still an employee of the IRS. And Shapley says, my supervisors have already started to extract some sort of revenge on me for doing this, claiming that these weren't protected disclosures because I'm a whistleblower, but that I'm somehow violating the law. This is serious stuff. This may be one of the first things that I have seen that has my attention in a different way. These two guys sound serious to me, and they sound credible to me. Now, that's not the end of the story, and both of them say that. Shapley finishes by saying, hey, listen, this isn't the end. This should be the beginning. And he implores the committee, please do some kind of investigation. Encourage the IRS and DOJ to do a real investigation and dig into these things, because we were stymied in what we were trying to do. This is Shapley's words, we've never seen a case handled like this before. Now, if you're a Biden apologist or you're just drinking that Kool-Aid, you're doing yourself and America a disservice here. You should want them to do a full investigation. You should want them to appoint a special prosecutor to look into this. Now, we had that with the Durham report on some aspects of some of the stuff that went on, and Durham didn't find nearly what everyone thought he would find. Well, that's good, right? Like, we want that kind of investigation. Now, there are those out there who are like, well, obviously, Durham's part of the problem. I mean, if we don't get the result we want, then obviously the process was flawed. That's Machiavellian. That ain't American. America is the process gets us to the truth and justice. And right here, what we know from Shapley and Ziegler is the process was corrupted, and it was corrupted by Biden's people. Now, we talked a long time yesterday about how the comments about for candidates for AG and DA and the comments of President Trump and all these others imputing the political partisanship and motives of prosecution are poison to criminal justice system. Well, this is right at that same level. This may be worse because this is an actual corruption of the criminal justice system. If you take away information from a deciding U.S. attorney or a prosecutor, or you influence them from above in the decisions that they make, how can you possibly trust that we're getting the truth or justice? Same texter, by the way, super exercised about this. Call in, man. We're going back and forth on this. Let's not do this over text. Call in at 303-696-1970. When you and me, buddy, we can have all the conversations we want. It's not that you don't bring up good points, but don't do it in text, man. Have the conversation. Here's another text. Holy crap, Trump told Barr what to do and he did it. Hypocrisy. What in the hell do you mean by that, man? Call in and let's have the conversation. If you think that Shapley and Ziegler are lying, why wasn't that revealed yesterday? What are their motives? What's Ziegler's motive to come forward on this? Here's another one. They slow rolled the warrants to give them more time to plan, and the statute of limitations would expire to charge the felonies, which are supposed to be mandatory per the document. That may very well be the case. Shouldn't we get to know that? Shouldn't we have people that sit there and answer questions under oath? Why didn't you put out the search warrants when you could? Now, there may be some investigative reasons for it. Guy texts in, I ain't no buddy. That's just a term of art. Listen, man or woman or whatever gender you choose, I don't give a crap. I want to have the conversation about this. You seem very exercised over the fact that Shapley and Ziegler seem to be credible to me, and that we're putting this thing out here. If you've got information to the contrary, or you want to debate the significance of their testimony, which wasn't covered very well by the mainstream media, then call in, man. 303-69 or woman, 303-696-1971. Tell me the flaws in this analysis. If you listen to the testimony the way you suggest that you have, tell me what you found incredible about it. Tell me what their motives were for coming forward and saying this. Now, there's a lot of stuff that has come out with these committees that I've been like, nah, not interested, not that big a deal. A lot of rumor, a lot of conjecture. Not these two dudes. These two dudes had the goods. And at the very least, anybody, either side of the political aisle, should be wanting to have a special prosecutor do a deep dive on this. Even if at the end of the day, the answer is, we've got answers for all of these issues, and there's nothing to see here. Even if that is the result, that's what we should want, because right now, man, you got my attention. I think something's going on here, and it ain't good. It ain't good for the criminal justice system. It ain't good for the IRS, and it's not good for America. We need to get to the bottom of this. So ain't nobody buddy. Give us a call, 303-696-1971. You can too. What is going on here? If you didn't watch the testimony, will you? And if you saw it, tell me what you heard there. Because I'm saying you can't go off of what I tell you. You can't go off of that minute and 30-second clip. You certainly can't go off of the CNN, MSNBC pretend coverage that didn't happen. This is a big deal, man. This is kind of explosive stuff, and it leads to something else. You can't draw all the conclusions in the world from this. We can't know everything that went on, but dang, it sure looks like the Biden administration had influence over this particular investigation and the charging decision-making here. And why no charges out of California? Why no charges out of D.C.? Delaware guy can't affect those. Why not there? These are people that apparently were on the phone with these guys saying, we agree, felony charges are warranted. What is going on? 303-696-1971. What are we witnessing here? And shouldn't a special prosecutor, man, I've gone long again, be appointed in this case? Listen, stick around. We'll come back. We'll get to your texts, your calls. Hopefully, Bar Buddy, Trump Buddy, Buddy, whoever it is, gives us a call and we have this conversation where we can go back and forth right here. It's George Brauchler on The George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brauchler back with you here, 710 KNUS on the George Show. Some texts trying to get this back and forth, saying, hey, call in, man. And can't call, not presentable. Remember, it's on the phone. Short of you sounding slurred or the background sounds of you waiting to take the stage near the pole, I feel like you are presentable and we can have this conversation. Now, one of the things that they've said is, and again, this is just classic for the conversations we have here. What I don't like is hypocrisy. Biden put his finger on the scales and Trump didn't. Hypocrisy. I'm not sure why we continue to engage in this juvenile, illogical whataboutism, as if we can explain away or justify the conduct of the person we like because the person we don't like did the exact same thing or something in the same zip code. That is just such dumb thinking. That is not mature, level-headed thinking. It's not principled thinking. We can look at both situations and find fault with each person without having to defend the other. And you've heard me on this station for months now rail against those who just simply swallow every ridiculous thing that President Trump has said or done. And they can always find a way to justify it. And 75% of those justifications come from, well, what about Biden? What about Obama? What about Hillary Clinton? I just don't care. It doesn't matter. If somebody does something that's a violation of the law or they do something wrong, we call them out for it. So this idea that, hey, Biden put his fingers on the scale and Trump didn't, hypocrisy, who cares, man? That's not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation is it looks a lot like a dude is escaping justice in a way that no other American, you and me included, would have, simply because of his last name. Now, I want to be clear about this, too. I in no way am suggesting that President Biden has direct knowledge of this or has put his finger on the scale. I don't know that that's true. And for folks that are out there like, oh, come on, George, don't be so naive. I'm not going there unless you bring me evidence of it. But what I am willing to conclude, at least based off of this untested testimony of Shapley and Ziegler in front of this Judiciary Committee yesterday, is that members of the Biden administration, whether he knew about it or not, were definitely working to protect him and to protect Hunter Biden through their manipulation of the investigation, if not outright influence over the decision-making of the U.S. attorney in Delaware. I can conclude that. I can get there from what they've said because that's what they said happened. But this idea that we can't, you've got to acknowledge Trump. I don't have to do a thing. We can call out individual acts that are corrupt, that I think impugn the integrity of the criminal justice system. And all the folks out there too, again, this is my rant here. The folks out there that want to burn down the FBI and we've got to start over and and the whole FBI is rotten to the core. What a bunch of crap. You know, we talked to Dan Oates earlier this morning about the Aurora Theater massacre, which took place 11 years ago today, 11 years ago this morning. You know who else showed up there in a big way, not just from the moment it happened, but all the way through the sentencing of this case was the FBI. Man, we had a guy, Jeremy Phelps, super agent. Guy's now, I think somewhere else in the country after doing a stint back at DC. But this guy was with us all along the way. And I tell you, the outcome that we got that was favorable, the good things we were able to do was in large part because of Jeremy's efforts. That guy's an FBI agent. And you tell me that guy's rotten to the core? Come on. So I don't want to go down the road of, hey, what's wrong with the FBI? I do want to go down the road of we need to call out, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, the things that I think that are wrong and that you think are wrong. And so when I look at this stuff, this is one of the first times that I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking to myself, holy smokes, man, there's something more than just, hey, our guy got a favorable plea bargain. These two folks, still, I think, currently employed with the IRS. I know Shapley is. I think Ziegler is. These guys are putting their careers and their reputations on the line to come forward and say, hey, man, this is weird. Stuff is happening here that we've never seen happen with other investigations. There's only one explanation for it. And that is that some influence is being brought to bear in the decision-making process about the investigation and about the charges that are levied in this case. And I'm not a special prosecutor guy at the federal level. I think that they are appointed way too often and it's a run amok kind of thing. But in this case, it's got to happen. Has to happen. Because you have the ultimate decision maker, the guy from whom all the executive authority flows to allow the U.S. attorney to do anything. All of that is in the dad of the guy being investigated. If my nephew had a traffic ticket and there was such a situation, I got off that case as the DA. Why? Because I can't touch it. I can't have influence over that. I can't just say to the prosecutor that works for me and I sign their checks and all that stuff. I can't say, hey, I want you to know I've got a family member that has run afoul of the law, but you do whatever you think is right. That would look like garbage. So of course, I instantly say, I need a special prosecutor on this case. And that's exactly what happened. I think it was El Paso County sent one up. That's just how it has to be every single time. But we don't have it here, and it needs to be here. And the reason it needs to be here is because of stuff that was testified to yesterday, like by Gary Shapley.
In this country, we believe in the rule of law, and that applies to everyone. There should not be a two-track justice system depending on who you are and who you're connected to. Yet, in this case, there was. Based on my experience, I'm here to tell you that the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office and Department of Justice handling the Hunter Biden tax investigation was very different from any other case in my 14 years at the IRS. At every stage, decisions were made that benefited the subject of this investigation. For example, prosecutors concealed contents of Hunter Biden's laptop from investigators. DOJ slow-walked steps to include interviews, serving document requests, and executing search warrants. Warrants that were ready as early as April of 2020, but were delayed until after the November 2020 election and never pursued. Investigators were not allowed to follow up on WhatsApp messages from Hunter Biden's Apple iCloud backup, where he suggested he was sitting next to his father. Assistant United States Attorney Leslie Wolf cited the optics of executing a search warrant at President Biden's residence as a deciding factor for not allowing it, even though she agreed that probable cause existed. Prosecutors instructed investigators not to ask about the big guy or dad when conducting interviews. The Biden transition team was tipped off about interviews the night before the investigation went over, a fact my FBI counterpart confirmed to this committee in recent testimony, where the result was that only one witness spoke to investigators that day.
What? I mean, I'll play it again later in the show, but if you listen to that, the list of things that were done that would impact the investigation and potential outcome in terms of charging are redunculous. They're redunculous. Tipping off people so that witnesses wouldn't cooperate or talk to the FBI because they'd been gotten to ahead of time, that's a problem. How about the woman that says, hey, the optics of executing a search warrant on the president's home are just so dreadful, we shouldn't do it. You talk about a double standard or a two-tiered system. It's not Trump and Biden. It's these political elites and you and me. You think if they had a search warrant for you or your dad, they would ever once discuss the optics of it? Hell no. They would be in your garage, in your basement, in your dirty clothes. They'd be in your underwear drawer. They'd be all over the place without any regard for what your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends thought. They don't care about that stuff. They're going to execute the search warrant because that's what they're charged with doing. But when it comes to the president, we have to think about the optics. I don't think so. I feel the same way about President Trump. You need to get a search warrant to go get stuff out of Mar-a-Lago, then you go do it. Now, in this particular case, he's the one that outed them. He's the one that brought the media attention to it. So that's on him. But you go where the evidence leads you. You go with the search warrant that you get to go get the evidence to get you to the truth. That's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. That's an American thing. This is just bonkers. Got a text from our friend Joan who says, I think she meant impeach Garland, Merrick Garland, but it says impeachment of Garvin. I think she means impeach Merrick Garland. Why? What for? There's no evidence yet that what he testified to was the product of him lying, knowing that he was wrong. I presume, like any other leader of an organization, he relies upon the information given to him by the people that he put in place to advise him. Now, if it's proven that this guy knew when he was saying, hey, this dude has full, unadulterated authority to make decisions on this, if he knew that that was false or that it was limited or there was DOJ influence being brought to bear on this guy, then yeah, I feel differently. Then we got to get rid of that dude. You don't get to lie to Congress, especially when you're Attorney General of the United States. But absent that, what we may have is just incompetence. He has surrounded himself with people who are far more political than he thought, and they did not provide him with the information he needed. I can tell you things like that have happened when I was the DA. I was not given perfect information, and I made certain decisions, and later on I'd be like, oh, come on, man, you have to tell me that extra piece of information. That's part of leadership. But impeach him, you got to tell me what for. You got to be very specific about what we're impeaching him for, and it can't be you're not doing your job well. That's not why you impeach people. 303-696-1971. We have a couple lines full right now. Another one that's open. We're going to cut away for a break. With whatever time we have left, we'll take the calls that we can. It's you and me on The George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brauchler back with you here, 710 KNUS. Want to get to the callers before the top of the hour. Dwayne from Divide, you're on 710. What do you think?
Well, sir, I have to sit there and say at times, Stevie Wonder could see that Hunter Biden was getting a hell of a deal on all these things. I mean, seriously, how can you not sit there and say, this guy's got no understanding whatsoever of energy, but Ukraine is paying him huge amounts of dollars. Now, all of a sudden, his dad's in office, and they're receiving huge amounts of dollars to do things. I mean, this is not a 28-step program. This is 5 steps.
I think there's two
job.
different things, though. One is, does the guy get the benefit of the Biden name and the influence his father brings in terms of those contracts and the pay? I think that's undeniable. That's true. This guy doesn't have qualifications.
Yes,
for that.
thank you.
But the other issue is the one of, is he getting preferential treatment? And while I've always said, listen, I want to know more. Like, I want to know what other people similarly situated have had as a result in terms of charging and sentencing. That's the part I've always wanted to know. And there hasn't been a lot of good information on it. Well, this is different than that. This is just simply 2 guys that were part of the investigation over years coming out and saying, hey, folks, this whole thing has been treated differently from the word jump. And here are some examples. And now it's like, dang, what do we do now?
Well, if you look back on the members of Congress who have got domestic violence, bad check writing, and other items, they're not prosecuted. Look at the statutes for them. You don't get to prosecute anybody in Congress or the Senate. They're immune from prosecution. So you don't think that doesn't go from Congress? It doesn't go up the ladder to the different people?
I don't think they're truly
George, I'm not
immune
one to
from
sit there and be a
prosecution.
bomb thrower here.
Dwayne, I don't
But
think
no,
I don't think they're immune from prosecution. I don't think that's true. I think they may not be prosecuted, and it may be a de facto immunity, but I don't think there's anything in the law that keeps them from being prosecuted for their transgressions of the law.
Well, I didn't have time to dig up the statute because it's about 25 years old. And I know you're gone next week, but there is a statute that basically says members of Congress cannot be charged with any type of item. I guess right now, the only thing they could get away with is a Me Too. Oh, wait, no, Tara Reid had to sit there and leave the country because she sat there and went against President Biden on that. So I'm trying to say, is there a 2-tiered system? Yeah, there is a 2-tiered system. There's them with everything and the rest of us sucking air. Okay, and you know me, I'm not a bomb thrower on this, but the statutes and everything else that are done right now are not to the citizenry. It's becoming more and more a kingdom and a fiefdom.
Well, for me, this right here, these 2 guys, listening to them testify, they're different than the other witnesses that have been brought forward. And I'm just not a fan of the MTG approach to all this. But these 2 guys struck me as serious, as credible, as informed. And when they testified the way they did about these things, at a minimum, even Merrick Garland should say, holy smokes, I didn't know this was going on, and that's on me, but let's appoint a special prosecutor a la Durham and get to the bottom of this. I think America deserves that. And if the Biden administration did nothing wrong, they deserve it too. But this idea that we're all just going to shrug and you're going to listen to these guys on the Democrat side of things say this is all a bunch of nonsense, it just can't work. Dwayne, forgive me, man. I ran out of time there because you and I were chatting up so well. Love having the call. Listen, stick around. Tom Teves, he was affected by events from 11 years ago. We're going to talk with him for a bit, and then we'll get back on this topic. George Brauchler, 710 KNUS. George Brauchler back with you here, 710 KNUS. Halfway through the Thursday show on this July the 20th, it was 11 years ago earlier this morning that a mass murderer went into a theater at the corner of I-225 in Alameda and tried to murder hundreds of people. He was successful in murdering 12 and injuring 70 others. Every time I get the opportunity on this particular day, I like to remind folks, listeners, in particular in this community, in the Denver Aurora community, about what happened on that day. And I think we do a decent job of it. But probably the thing that escapes us most is the impact that those events still had on the victims, far more than it had on anybody else that touched the case, including myself, including Dan Oates, who you heard from in the 6 o'clock hour. I'm pleased to be joined by someone I got to know through this horrible tragedy, and he's taken time out of his day to talk to us about it. He's been on the show before. We're going to keep having him on as long as he continues to make the mistake of saying yes, and that's Tom Teves. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, George. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. The bigger question is, how are you and Karen doing? I mean, does this day stand out differently than other days, or will it ever again become just another day on the calendar?
I think what people make the mistake is that I hear all this crap, to be honest with you, and sorry about my French. But,
no, keep going.
You're going to heal, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. I had a reporter after Sandy Hook, and I may have told you this before, George, asked me 6 months after Alex was murdered, did Sandy Hook open the wound? You don't lose your firstborn son and you heal. That doesn't happen. There's a hole in your soul. There's literally not a day that goes by that I don't see tears welling up in Karen's eyes for some reason or another. Or I don't notice something, and, I have a pretty busy job, right?
Yeah.
And something hits me as I'm going through the world, right? And it's like, oh, Alex, and then like you want to smile for a minute, and then the reality of the memory feels good for like 12 seconds, and then the crushing reality of, yeah, but he's dead. And I was thinking about it when he texted me that, it's 11 years now, but 13 or 14 years from now, he's going to be dead more than he was alive. And that's just crushing. And it doesn't get better. That's what people need to realize. And I'm only speaking for me and Karen. I don't know about anybody else in Aurora. I don't know about anybody else who's lost a child. But for me, it just, you manage, it's like, I always manage to use the simile that it's like lifting weights. If you want to bench press 275 pounds and you start off at 100 pounds is heavy, and you bench press 275, you train. 100 pounds is still the same weight. You just got better at carrying it. And that's really what happened.
I don't know how you or Karen or any of the other victims that, you and I got to know you at a different level. I mean, you're part of a fraternity that no parent wants to be a part of ever, but I don't get how you're sane. Do you know what I mean? Like I try to put myself in that position. And I've told this story before that, little Veronica Mosier Sullivan was the youngest of our victims, 6 years old. And during this whole trial, my 5-year-old would crawl up into bed between mom and dad. And I'd had sleepless nights thinking about the case. And I remember thinking, how do any of these people get out of bed in the morning? How do you do it? How did you do it?
Well, let's remember with that case, she also lost a baby she was carrying.
That's right. You're right. Ashley did. Yeah.
There's another soul that's dead, right?
That's right.
But how do you do it? Honestly, it's like anything else. You put one foot in front of the other. Fortunately, I think for Karen and I, we had 2 other sons, so we really had no choice, right? That one of them was just becoming a senior in high school, and the other one was becoming a junior in high school. What were we supposed to do? Just let this bastard win, and go out in the streets and become a homeless person? That's just not who we are, right? But it sucks. It never stops sucking. And I don't belabor it. I try not to wear it on my sleeve, but I do wear Alex's bracelet on my arm every day. And we're doing everything we can to what we're trying to do is stop it from happening again, because honestly, it's too late for us, right? Alex is dead. The only person who came back is God, and I don't think Alex was God, so he's not coming back, right? So, you just got to do everything you can to try to help the next person.
I want to talk about those things in a minute, but for folks that don't know or don't remember from our past conversations, just tell us a little bit about Alex. I have the opportunity to share the story of this case and the prosecution to prosecutors groups across the country and frankly, globally. And every time I do, I get a chance to talk about the victims. So I remember a lot about Alex and what a special man he was and who he was becoming. But if you don't mind, if it's not too much, tell us about him.
Oh, Alex was, he was one of these people who just brought different groups together. I mean, honestly, I think in the way the country is now, Alex was very much needed. Maybe that's why evil killed him, right? But, he was just, I guess, a story. There's a couple stories, but one of them is Colorado-based, so I'll use that because Alex, obviously lived there when he was going to school in Denver. But they were at his University of Arizona friends came up, and they were at the American Beer Festival. And, young men can get a little bit inebriated in those situations, and we probably all could, right?
Yeah.
But his one friend, who's a skinny kid, nice kid, but skinny kid, was wearing a U of A shirt, and a kid with, I think, an Iowa State shirt started giving him a really hard time. And Alex was a state champion wrestler, right? So Alex just saw the whole thing going on, and the kid didn't know that Alex was friends with, Ryan. And Alex just went up to the kid and gave him a bear hug and said, "Can't we all just get along?" and smiled at him. But what he meant was, we're going to get along or this is going to go bad for you. But that's the way Alex was.
The other things, Tom, that came out in that trial that stick with me are, one, my takeaway was that your boy was the kind of anti-bully bully. Do you know what I mean? Like at school, here's this good-looking, super smart, top athlete. Everybody knew this kid, popular kid. But that based on the stories, I remember you and Karen talking about it, and some others at the sentencing too, that he's the kind of guy that stood up for the little guy just because.
Oh, that's just what he did always. He always tried to bring people together, but he always helped out somebody who needed a hand. That's just who he was. I mean, that's what I mean. I mean, he would have been perfect for the times we're in right now, George. And, he's not here.
Also, the story, and if you don't want to get into it, you don't have to, but the story that you guys only found out about after his death, know what I'm talking about with the hospital and the car accident and all that stuff.
Yeah, Alex was in a car accident. They went to visit a friend in Pepperdine, and that's why Alex was in that theater in Aurora, because he wanted all his friends to go, and he picked one that was in the middle. There was the damn movie was playing literally a half mile from his apartment. You have no idea how much that frustrated me. But anyway, different. But that was Alex. He always wanted to bring everybody together and make it easy for everybody. And they all went out to visit their friend at Pepperdine. So they drove from U of A, and there were 6 kids in a truck. And there was a kid from Atlanta that actually we had him over for Easter dinner that year, because he had no place to go. And of course, Alex, my father was like that too. He brought home strays. So Alex would always bring home a stray. So they're driving in the truck, and the kid got tired. So he let one of the girls drive, and the girl, they're young kids, right? They're driving 80 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour down the highway. She lost control of the truck. The truck went flipping over, and the kid got thrown from the truck, and he still to this day has severe head injury. And we never knew this. The father and the young man showed up at Alex's funeral, and I was like, I appreciate you coming, but you didn't have to do this. And he said, "No, you don't understand." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "You don't know, do you?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And what happened was, Alex, when the kid was in the hospital, when he first got in the hospital, Alex said he was in intensive care and the young man was in intensive care. And Alex said, "Dad, go sit with him. Mom's with me." Now, obviously, they wouldn't let me in, hospital rules and all that, but I tried. But the father said to me that every day while he was in the hospital recovering before they could take him back to Atlanta. Alex went and sat with him and played board games and cards or whatever the kid wanted to do every single day. And Alex never told us, which doesn't surprise me because I don't know if we ever told you, but Alex also had whatever it's called, the Little Brothers, where you take on a
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Big brother, big sister, that kind of thing.
Big brother, yeah, big brother. Sorry, yeah, I'm looking at it the other way. A big brother, and he had a kid in when he was in college in Tucson that he mentored. We really didn't even know that either. It's just who he was.
It's amazing. The other thing I don't know that people can appreciate all these years later. We've had so many people move into Colorado, Tom. I don't know anymore who was here when all this happened, but one of the things that folks probably don't know either is that Alex is a hero, as you know, and really traded his life for the woman he was with. If he had made any other decision, and you've probably gone through this in your head, the chances that he comes out of that theater are much greater, but he didn't do that. Instead, he threw himself over her, and that was how he ended up getting murdered.
Yeah, George, I did go through every one of the paths of those bullets that you showed on that chart. And yeah, it's a little frustrating, but that's who he was. I'll tell you a different story, George. That's really wild.
Yeah.
Is last August, I was in Seattle, and I had a long meeting with my team, and I'm not going to get into this corporate environment. I don't want to get into that, but so I was with a colleague. We had spent a long day with everybody, and we were getting something to eat at the restaurant before we were going to go to bed because we both had early flights out in SeaTac. And I started choking, and I passed out. I couldn't breathe.
Oh Lord!
And some young man came and did CPR on me for like 7 minutes. Bill and Reed, and then finally the fire department. How can they get there that fast, right? Finally, the fire department got there and kept me alive for another 15 minutes. And then the EMTs sucked a piece of meat out of me, and I started breathing again. But they rushed me to, and by the way, I don't remember any of this. Poor Karen had to deal with it. But they rushed me to the hospital. And the point is, there was a doctor there that was in the trauma care. And we found out later, before we left the hospital, because I was in a coma they like cool your blood down so your brain doesn't swell. I don't want to get into the specifics. Yeah. So I was in a coma for 4 days, and this doctor was in school when Alex was murdered at the school and I don't remember the school, but where that Howard went to school. He was going to medical school at the same school.
Are you kidding? University of Colorado Health Sciences Center.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And he said, when you came in, he said, I don't know I never do this, but for some reason I looked at your face after we got you stabilized, and I looked you up, and I went to the neurosurgeon and said, we have to save this guy. He's got too much to do. Oh,
wow. Oh, Tom, geez. What a story, man. I mean, if you're looking for some sort of providential intervention here, that's got to be it. I mean, that's an amazing thing. And I wanted to talk to you about this. We're talking with Tom Teves. He is a husband to Karen, father to Alex, and I didn't ask this either. How are your other kids doing in light of this? That may sound like a stupid question, but I don't think you and I have ever talked about that. How have they progressed from this? I know that they'll never forget Alex either, but how do you think it's changed them?
Oh, it's dramatically changed them. My youngest is mildly autistic, and he's doing great. He's a software engineer. In fact, they just asked him to work. He got promoted last year, and they asked him to work on cybersecurity, which I think is a pretty important topic right now. So we're pretty excited about that. And then Tommy, the middle guy, has kind of stepped into Alex's role of trying to hold this crazy family together. Because that's what scared me the most was, Alex was kind of the glue that we all went around because he was just that kind of person. And Tommy's done that, and he's doing well too. He's also a software engineer, and they're both doing fine. But it's funny because I really, Nick being autistic, he doesn't say a lot unless you drag it out of him, right? Mm-hmm. And I was talking about something, and I said, we got to be careful because the date's coming up and it's really tough on mom. And he said, well, I've been through a lot too, Dad.
Mm.
And for Nick to say that, it means a lot. So, it's that's what I mean. People don't understand. It's not a 1-day event. It's not a 3-month event. It's not a 3-year event. It changes the trajectory of your life, and not for the better, to be honest with you.
Tom, you had mentioned that you and Karen have both taken steps to try to prevent things like this from happening to any other Toms and Karens out there and Alexes that are out there. What are the things that you guys are doing?
Well, it was obvious, and George, you know this because you saw the damn. They've had a couple Super Bowls in Phoenix, so you can see what the media trucks look like at a Super Bowl. Well, if you could think back to what was in that parking lot of media trucks at the theater for days and days, it was more than a Super Bowl. It was insane.
It was crazy.
And it became obvious to me as I was traveling to Colorado to unfortunately pick up my dead son's body, which, as you know, George, I couldn't let Karen or the boys see him again because they told me you do not want to see him.
Yeah.
Like that, he was, the back of his head was blown off with an armor-piercing bullet, and you guys, for the right reasons, don't get me wrong, but the police had him laying there for 12 hours or something, so he was not right to be seen. So they never got to see him again. But all I ever heard was this thing, right? You know what I would call him, but I can't do it on your radio show.
Yep.
But this coward, and they kept making him into an anti-hero, which is exactly what you have in these, all these Marvel movies. There's always an anti-hero, so the hero can win, right? I mean, or it wouldn't be a movie, right? And I thought to myself, I don't know what it is, but there's something wrong with this, to the point where I used to get out of the hotel to go out to do whatever we had to do. Those, there was a lot of crazy stuff that happened in the 4 or 5 days around that. And I'd see the USA Today, and I started ripping them in half in the lobby. I think the people at the hotel thought I was crazy. But we started to do a lot of research, and it became infinitely apparent that what these people want, and I'm not talking about somebody who's doing a gangland shooting. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about random mass shootings, right? They want to be heroes. They're living in their mom's basement. They are basically don't have the discipline or the smarts to go out and make something of their life. So they think that they can have their 15 minutes of fame by going out and killing people. And the reality is, you do the research, and I did a TED Talk actually.
I was there.
Colorado.
I was there, man. Remember?
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Sorry.
No, I know. You've been talking all over the country, and for right reasons. But tell us what you discovered.
Well, that these people want to be heroes. They're doing it. That's when the media tells you we have to research them to find out their motivation. The only motivation that ties them together is they want to be famous. They want to be heroes, and we give them exactly what they want. And, George, I've spent a lot of time arguing with the media, and, they can't refute. What happens is you give them all the data and the facts. And honestly, we were just, in fact, Jad, right? I'm sure.
Yep.
Well, he had us connected with the National Active Assailant Conference that was in Troy, Michigan this year, and they gave out the Alex Teves Award to the media company. Yeah, the media. Yeah, he's such a good guy too, right? That guy's a hero.
Yep.
Like, you could say what you want, but he made the decision to start taking people to the hospital in police cars, and we all know he probably could have lost his job for that.
Yep.
But how many lives did it save, right?
Countless. Countless.
The people in Colorado should be thrilled that man's still there for them.
Yeah.
But it's obvious, and the media will sit there and try to say, well, you can't. You won the argument when they sit there and say, well, you can't tell me what to do. And then I say, well, that's okay. So you're okay with getting people killed. Well, no. Well, but that's what you're doing. And it's if you watch the TED Talk, I lay it out. We don't have enough time here, obviously, but it's unequivocal. And when I talk to them now, and they try to tell me, well, we have to study them, I tell them, okay, it's been 11 years. Give me the first study. Not
Yeah,
not the
right,
right study. But give me
right.
the first study that you put out. You
Right.
haven't put anything out. All you're trying to do is make money on other people's lives. And someday the bell will toll for you. Be careful.
I do think that you guys have had an undeniable impact because in at least in my sense around here, I don't know about nationally, but around here, we have sadly continued to have high profile shootings and mass shootings and stuff. But more often than not, it seems to me there isn't the same prolonged sort of focus on the shooter as there is on the rest of the case. And I think that's because you guys had such a big impact. In fact, even at the time, I remember almost all the local media out here, 947, 31, to all those others, they pretty much got on board with you and Karen pretty quickly with that. And the only people that seemed to not care were the CNNs, the MSNBCs, the Foxes, all the national folks who don't live here and don't really care about here. They all seem to be like, yeah, whatever. And they continued their focus. But the local folks, I think, were like, oh, no, I get it. It makes sense. But I think it has now permeated other places. Everybody knows what you guys have done with the no notoriety thing. I just had Jaclyn Schildkraut on, who's the executive director of this mass shooting thing at the Rockefeller Government Center.
Yeah, we know Jackie.
Yeah. And she has been like, oh, I was at this event where and I'm like, you guys are everywhere doing this. And I think it's having an impact.
Well, we're trying, and it's funny when they call and say our organization is me and Karen on our laptops when I'm not working and she's not doing what she does. Right. So, it's to me and in the TED talk, I say it like, we don't have any funding. We're not asking for your money. We are asking for your time though, to go after when you see a media, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or any of them,
right.
And they're turning these people into anti-heroes. And if you want to show them where they end up. They either end up on a morgue table or in chains. Show them that way if you got to show them. Don't show them with a gun brandishing it. All you're going to do is get a whole bunch of people killed. And it's funny because I was arguing at one point with a Yahoo News reporter. And this was before the trial, and halfway through it, he said, he looked at me, I could see his eyes open and change, right? Because we were going at it. George, you and I have gone at it a couple of times.
Yes, we have. You are scary.
You're no Wilson Wallflower, neither am I, right?
Yeah,
but,
right.
That makes for good, that's how this country was built, right?
Right.
People having opinions and working through it, right?
That's right, and we did.
But he looked at me and said, there's nothing in this for you, is there? And I said, no, there's not a damn thing in it for me. I'm doing it for your child, not for mine.
Yeah.
And at one point, all the media were trying to paint this. Again, I keep coming up with words I can't use on your thing. We'll go with coward. As crazy, right? Because, that was that whole. And by the way, that defense attorney is a scumbag. Can I use that on your radio station?
You can say
I'm
scumbag,
sorry,
yeah.
He's a scumbag. I forget his name. I think his name was King. He's a scumbag. But, to compare the bullets to Tom Brady's deflated football, what kind of asshole? Sorry, I can't say that.
No, you can't.
Anyway, all the reporters were talking about, oh, is he crazy and crazy? And I finally had enough because Karen and somebody else were talking to him. And I just said, you keep talking about him being crazy. Bet, keep talking about it. We all know he's not crazy. He knew what he was doing. You keep talking about it. Get him put in a mental hospital. And you know what? In 7 years, he's going to come out and he's going to kill. It'll be your children. And every one of them. In fact, there was a reporter who came and talked to me on the 10-year anniversary, and he was in that, whatever they call it, the gaggle or whatever.
Yeah.
You know better than
Right.
I don't do this stuff, right? They all went, oh, and they all took a step back. Like all of a sudden it hit them like, we better be careful because it could be our kids. Now, when all of a sudden it becomes your kid, then it matters, right?
Yeah.
So
The one thing I was going to say that is, and I think you guys have had a positive impact, but now what you can see is these channels now want to focus on the shooter for whatever political advantage they can get, right? Like they want to say, oh, this person's a registered Democrat and they supported or this person is on social media supporting Trump. And it defeats the whole purpose of this, which is to de-emphasize that person in exchange for focusing on the victims and what happened and all that other stuff. But that's the new version of this is now I think it's less about understanding truly who they are than what political hay can we make with them.
Which it feels like that's all anybody does. And, George, it's been bothering me a lot. Like we lost a friend, and she would one day she had a statement that how did we get this way? Aren't we all Americans? Like, what happened to us?
Yeah. What
I
happened?
mean, that's the reality. I mean, it's just going back to the media, they have to stop politicizing everything. I still like when, and Karen's going to laugh because I never say this, but Walter Cronkite, I think I said it at that time. I struggle with certain English language words. He'd get on, and remember, he was only on for an hour or 30 minutes, so he didn't have to fill 24/7, right?
Right.
But he'd get on, and he'd tell you the facts. And you made your own decision. You didn't need a panel. I don't need people to tell me what to think on either side. Because honestly, I don't think I fall into any stereotype, right? I'm going to think what I think based on the facts. Give me the facts, I'll make a decision. Stop telling me what to think. And it's getting people killed, and it's really scary. I agree with you. They do both sides try to make hay with it.
Tom Teves, we've taken you very, very long in your otherwise busy morning. I know you have a million different things you got to take care of for the corporate stuff that you do. So thank you again for doing this. I'm hopeful we can stay in touch on not just July 20th, but I'll reach out at some other times too, just to see how you and Karen are doing.
Yeah, George, we're always open. You're a good man.
Thank you, sir. Hey, I'll talk with you soon. That was Tom Teves. He's Karen's husband. He's Alex's father. This is 11 years since Tom and Karen found out that their oldest boy, who was, just a superstar by all accounts, and you heard it there in that interview, was murdered in that theater right there at the corner of 225 and Alameda. And I'm going to continue to have Tom, and if Karen ever wants to come on, I'll have Karen on to have these conversations because I think they're invaluable to the community, but also in trying to prevent some of this stuff from happening in the future. And I guess that's my question for you. How do you prevent this? How do you prevent stuff like this from happening? When we talk to Jaclyn Schildkraut in the 6 o'clock hour, you know that it's happening at an increased pace here. We know the weapons of choice, and it's not the rifle that the media tells us about. What do we do? How do you stop these mass shootings? 303-696-1971. We're going to cut away for a break. We'll come back. We'll get to you at George Brauchler on the George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brauchler back with you here, 710 KNUS, going right to the phone lines here. Jason, you're on 710 KNUS. Jason, what do you think?
How are you today, George?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where I've got a lot of good things going on in my life today, but it's just a little bit like a dark cloud because, one, you look out there and there's a dark cloud. It's interesting. But, you know, after I talked to Tom and I talked to Chief Oates and others about today, it's I don't know, man, it's just it has an impact on you when you think back to what's happened and how I get to go on and have great days, and Tom and Karen and their boys are still dealing with the loss of Alex. So anyway, sorry, long answer, but tell me what your thoughts are.
Oh no, that I completely understand. I tell you, the older I get, the more fortunate and blessed that I feel I am. You know, I've got a roof over my head.
Yeah.
I have my health. Our family is good. You know, I'm better than I deserve to be. But
yeah.
I came across a video actually yesterday just by, you know, scrolling through YouTube by Thomas Sowell.
Yeah.
And it's called The Fascinating Economics of Crime.
Yeah.
So if you do that or look at it on YouTube, it's a, I don't know, 6 or 7 minute video. And he talks about the economics of crime. He talks about what percentage of people, and if I remember correctly, it was something like 6% of men commit 50% of the crime. And this is a statistic that goes across all countries. He talks about the US, UK, New Zealand. And if you don't look at what the numbers tell us and target that specific group, you're never going to solve the problem. But you have to be honest about it. Is it 6%? What's the common denominator of the 6%? Is it boys that grew up in broken homes? Is it boys that grew up in lower economic levels? Okay, that's who you need to take a look at. Bottom line, it's not the gun. You have to have somebody that is pulling the trigger, because then he also talks about in the UK, yes, they've taken guns out of the hands of civilians. So, okay, gun crime has gone down. However, home invasions are actually like something like 40% higher in the UK than they are in the US.
Wow. I didn't know that.
This video is awesome. The fascinating.
How old's this video?
It shows that it was posted 1 year ago.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I still had it open on one of my tabs because I just came across it.
What's the conclusion you drew from it? I mean, folks that are conservative know Thomas Sowell. I mean, he's very, very bright and articulate economist. Like, he can make those complicated things seem so much more digestible. What was your takeaway?
I was in debate in high school. My mom wanted me to be an attorney. I told her I had higher aspirations than that, but I think
good for you, man.
Well, I think I ended up in a different job though that has about the same reputation. So, but
wait a minute,
words have
you're
meanings.
A congressman?
Oh, but I'm not a doctor. No, but I'm not a doctor. I'm a pilot.
Oh,
So,
no, pilots have far better reputations than attorneys, man. Nobody wants to trust their life to an attorney.
Yeah, well, we need you guys just like you need us. We all, that's what makes the world go around. I tell you, words have meanings, and you have to understand that you have to look at data. You have to look at why is A plus B equals C, or A plus B may equals D, but you have to understand why you're getting to that D. What, to me, it gave me real numbers that I could show somebody this video and go, okay, what's the trade-off? And Sowell even said it in another video. I love Thomas Sowell. I read numerous books of his. I love his videos.
Yeah.
And, he will say is like, there is no such thing as a net zero. Every decision has a consequence. It's a trade-off. Every decision, everything that you come to, there is some sort of trade-off. It's what is the level of consequence that you are willing to live with. And Sweden, everybody wants to talk about the Scandinavian countries and how wonderful and how safe they are. Sweden is the rape capital of the world. I mean,
is it really?
Look at that. Yes. Look, yeah. Google rape capital of the world. And I mean, Sweden is has one of the highest levels of rape in the freaking world. Okay. And as a conservative, as a gun owner, it's, a gun is cool. And I can kill you just as quick with a screwdriver as I will as I can with a gun. Now, granted, you walk into a theater, the gun is going to give you, is going to do something that a screwdriver can't do. But again, with the UK study, it showed you take the firearm, the great equalizer, out of the civilians, the criminal does not. The criminal doesn't care.
Well, and it's going to be different here too, because unlike some of those other countries, we don't have the ability to magic away all the guns that we have. Like some of those communities were not premised on the same revolution that we were, and the same Constitution and the same Second Amendment and all that other stuff. It was easier to get those guns out of those hands, or at least out of the lawful ones. I don't see that happening here. I think you're right.
Yes.
I think at best, all the law-abiding citizens, I'm going to amend that. Many of the law-abiding citizens would simply be like, well, I want to comply with the law. But those folks that are inclined to use guns for nefarious purposes, they don't care. They didn't care to begin with. They probably didn't get their guns legally anyway.
Well, it is a self-defense shooting course that I had taken. One of the instructors was very good. We talked about the criminal mind. And to the criminal, that is their job. And you correct me on anything. You dealt with criminals more. I don't deal with criminals.
Thank God you're a pilot.
That's their job. That's why I've got that door. I delegate that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's their job. How many times do you hear a victim say, I couldn't believe this was happening to me. I couldn't believe that this was actually going on.
Yeah.
Yes. And so what happens, the Jane and Joe average citizen, when they are put in this condition, their brain locks up and they freeze because they don't know what to do. And that's what the criminal is expecting to happen. And again, let's step back from what Soul says in here. It's 6% of society that's creating 50% of the chaos. You have to be honest about that. I mean, you have to look at the numbers and to say, oh, we want to take guns out of the hands of 100% of everyone. That 6% is not going to change because they're already breaking the law. And if they're creating 50% of the crime now, that number, or the Britain standards, that amount of crime is just going to go up.
Jason, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for, by the way, being a sober and competent pilot. I'm wishing that upon you for all the people that fly.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for being out there dealing with the people that you deal with.
Man, thanks for calling in. Hey, listen, we got Jay on the line. We're going to take Jay as soon as we come back from a break here, but we got to do that. Before I do that, though, I do want to tell you about my dentist. It's Twin Aspen Dental Center, and these folks are the bomb. Like I've said this now more often than not. It wasn't just, hey, go check them out, but it's like, listen, if you're not in love with your dentist, and I don't mean in that romantic way, but I mean like that you look forward to going and seeing these folks and catching up with them, and you can have that relationship. But if you're not there, if this is just more like a routine thing you have to go through for the sake of your health, then give Twin Aspen Dental Center a shot. I mean, Doctors Richter and Snyder are the real deal. They're personable. They're invested in the community. They have long-term staff that actually care about you, not just getting you in and out of the chair. Great senses of humor, at least Shiloh does. I'm going to test out some of the others. Maybe I'll just have Shiloh the whole time I'm there. I don't know. But they're conveniently located at Stroh and Parker Road. You can get there from the northeast, southwest, whatever it is. You go check them out. It's that kind of small town feel with all the high-tech, top-shelf stuff that they do for the dental implants, the bridges, the fill in the blank. Whatever your mouth needs, they can do it. Actually do some more stuff than that too, but you got to call them to find out. 303-841-7466, 303-841-7466. You make sure that you tell them, hey, I'm calling because George asked me to. They'll be thrilled to hear that. You can also check them out at twinaspendentalcenter.com. That's twinaspendentalcenter.com. When we come back, Jay, the other calls, the other texts, George Brauchler, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Imagine the lifelong impact of a journey to the Holy Land, surrounded by like-minded travelers. Picture yourself stepping foot in iconic locations right out of history. With nationally syndicated radio hosts Dennis Prager and Mike Gallagher, you'll gain firsthand understanding of the spiritual and political importance of this vital region.
Hi, it's Mike Gallagher here. I hope you'll join Dennis Prager and me on an amazing journey through Israel in October 2023.
Discover Israel's vibrant culture and why this nation is such a strategic partner for the United States. Join Dennis Prager and Mike Gallagher on this life-enriching Israel tour, October 25th through November 3rd, 2023. For more information, call 855-565-5519 or visit standwithisraeltour.com.
George Brauchler back with you here, 710 KNUS. Not much time left, but I wanted to give it to the most patient, bestest of our callers, Jay from Denver. You're on 710. Jay, what did you want to tell us?
Oh, George, I'm just very excited that you're excited about this testimony yesterday from Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler.
Did you watch that stuff?
I watched every minute of it. I felt like I was watching Paul Revere wrapped into our founding fathers. These guys, these aren't just whistleblowers. These guys were one of them, head of international Department of Fraud for FBI. They're never going back to work there again. But their testimony to me was not only unbelievably credible, but they were laughing at Jamie Raskin when he was coming up with his baloney. One of the things I think is most important, their bosses told them to go have coffee and donuts instead of pursuing Hunter Biden and the big guy and a
craziness.
Storage unit. How many criminals have you ever tipped off to go to the storage unit 30 days in advance so they can go there before your guys could? You're a prosecutor.
On both hands,
I'm blown out of my
zero.
chair. Blown out of my
Zero.
chair. Yeah. And I could hang on to. I'll tell you one other thing I want to say is about the Aurora Theater thing. Floored by your guest. I can hang on if you like, but I was just absolutely so moved, especially when he said he was in a coma and a doctor that went to
I know,
school
craziness.
with the man you put behind bars.
Hey, Jay, forgive me, man. We're at that 10-second mark there. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. Hey, listen, stick around. Mike Flaherty from Magellan Strategies about a poll that Polis will care about. George Brauchler, 710 KNUS. George Brauchler back with you here. Final hour of the Thursday show. I'll be off tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday and then on some military duty, not here in the U.S. for the rest of that week. There is a ballot measure we've talked about on the show a couple times before. It's called HH, as in holy hell. No, I'm kidding. It's the one that Governor Polis and the legislature has put on the ballot that would ostensibly have some minor impact on your property taxes in the short term, but long term would ultimately remove your Tabor refunds for the next eternity. So it's important to know where this thing is because it's going to end up being on the ballot for this November. Here we are in July. We're getting into the throes of whatever campaign there's going to be both for it, and there will be one, and against it. And so one of the tools that I think that the public relies upon, but also upon the people who are advocating for and against this, is polling. And there's no better pollster out there than our next guest. His name is David Flaherty, and David is the man behind Magellan Strategy. Sir, thanks for joining us.
Hey, George. Great to talk to you and be on the show. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, long time no chat. Let's do this, though. For folks that haven't heard you on the show in a bit or are new listeners to the show, tell us about you and Magellan Strategies. What do you guys do? And then we'll get into what you did on this particular issue.
Sure, George. We're a public opinion research firm. Our clients are primarily local governments, school districts, special districts, and public policy groups. We provide polling and survey research. A lot of our work is polling about local ballot measures. Will a half-cent sales tax increase pass to fund roads, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been around since 2007 in Colorado. We also have a background in some political work. I was in D.C. for 15 years, so I've been doing this for a long time. But we were really interested in Proposition HH. We kind of couldn't resist trying to measure voter opinion because this thing is such a Rubik's Cube of policy changes if it's approved.
That's a great way to describe that, Dave. A Rubik's Cube of policy changes. How do you start the process of tackling this? Because you didn't just poll on what do you think of Prop HH? You did more than that. How do you start taking on this this task?
Sure. And this is a time-tested method for quality pollsters. And what we do is, we ask a couple of questions to get the respondent's head in the right place, like how concerned are you about your residential property values going up? How are you concerned if you don't own a home and you're a renter, rent going up? What do you think the economy? But then we say, how familiar are you with Proposition HH that's going to be on the ballot this November? And so we measure awareness, first of all, especially, in July. Only a third of folks, George, are even familiar at all relatively with Proposition HH. So 2/3 of likely voters don't have, they're not even aware about it. But then we say, okay, I'm now going to ask you to read the ballot measure language and tell me if you would vote yes and approve it or vote no and reject it. And it's what we call the uninformed ballot test. We haven't told them anything about it. It's like, okay, go ahead and read this. And, and here's how the kind of introduction is. Shall the state reduce property taxes for homes and businesses, including expanded property tax relief for seniors, and backfill counties, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a relatively simple ballot language, from a lot of the stuff that we look at. It's relatively vague. It's very general, but it really doesn't even begin to tell the story of all of the policy changes that would be triggered by this approval. So what we do is we first ask, okay, knowing that, and when we did that, and without telling them anything, here's what Prop HH says, would you vote yes or no? And a majority of likely voters, 54%, said, I'm going to vote for it. And I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling down here. 34% said that they would vote no and reject it, 12% being undecided. And that's not uncommon.
But by the way, this is language that the legislature chose. It's not language that gets filtered through the title board where they might address some of the issues that you ultimately address. This is the cherry pick language that the legislature wanted to put on the ballot. And it doesn't get altered. It doesn't get molested. Hell, Advanced Colorado Institute, I think, filed a lawsuit against it, and the court was like, good enough. Legislature has different rules. So this is the best language they're ever going to have on this, and they achieved 54% approval based off of that reading. And I'm sorry to interrupt, Dave, but go ahead.
No, not at all. No, and again, it's complicated, so I appreciate you, clarifying that, George, and that point. So it is. It's relatively straightforward. It's like, all right, this is about property tax relief. It's going to help seniors. It's going to help school districts. Oh, I like this. Now, typically, these sort of ballot measures start out with, shall taxes be raised, $450 million annually over X, Y, or Z, and it's just much more scary language that typically people are like, whoa, 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 very dense. So it's very simple. However, so after we read them that, we say, okay, now we're going to educate and inform you about some of the policy changes that will be triggered if this is approved. And we walk through 11 different, what we call information questions. And they're all factually based. They're all designed from policy experts. I mean, usually we can do this on our own, but there was so much going on behind the scenes if Prop HH is triggered that we reached out to several policy experts to say, okay, is this really what will happen? And and so after reading through and, all sorts of things like, because it's statutory, the Prop HH could be changed in the future by state legislatures. Your TABOR refund amounts are going to change. How you're going to receive your TABOR amount is going to change. And what we're really doing is talking about how, all right, some of the additional revenue that is received, obviously, this means less property tax for local governments and so forth. And however, they're going to be tried to be made whole or backfilled, as they use that language, by increasing the TABOR cap by 1%. But those dollars, 80% of those dollars go to school districts and only 20% goes to backfill. And again, I'm sure some of your listeners are thinking, this is crazy. What are we talking about? There's just a lot going on here, George. But after we educate and inform and say, okay, now that you've read and learned about Prop HH, we ask them to read the ballot language again. And now that you know a little bit more, I'm going to ask you again, would you vote yes or no on this? How would you do it? Support levels drop by about 11, 12%.
Is that significant? I mean, in what you do, is that a big drop?
It is a big drop. Honestly, it is. It really is, in the sense that, we really believe that the weight and the complexity of all of these things that do trigger, and we have drops among homeowners and among seniors that we measured going, for example, if you own your home, homeowners 55% initially supported, then it drops down to 44% support. Among seniors, and these are the seniors, it's that retired veteran couple that lives on, retirement income in Golden, and Gallagher's gone, so they just received a scary property tax bill. This is who this language is really geared towards. Support levels among seniors start at 59% and drop down to 48%.
Yikes.
There's a lot of pause going on. Now, granted, I am not saying or forecasting Prop HH is not going to be approved. It's definitely in toss-up territory, though. But there's just so many rabbit holes to go down and educate voters on, look, this is going to happen if it's approved. This is what's going to happen if it's approved. And, so that's what we measured. And all the data is out there. It's very public on our website, MagellanStrategies.com. But anyway.
Listen, it sounds like, and I don't need you to use this phrase, but I'm going to use it. But what it sounds like is the language at face value yields one result because it's deceptive or misleading in that it does not reveal the true consequences of a vote in favor of it. And when those consequences are revealed, support for it drops. It seems to me to at least support the notion that this language is crafted to mislead or misdirect. Am I saying that wrong? I don't need you to adopt those words, but am I saying it wrong?
I would agree, George, and we talk about it in our summary where it's undeniable that the intent and just on its face, this ballot language, as you read, doesn't even begin to tell to be straightforward about all of the impacts that will occur for state and local government funding levels, funding for school districts, funding for all sorts of entities that are out there, let alone taxpayer refunds, the impacts of TABOR. There's just a lot going on here. And I think that the Democrats and the majority and the governor perhaps really outthought themselves on this one, and they bit off a little bit more than they can chew. And they would have been better off kind of being more, single subject, if you will, because a lot of the stuff that I think they wanted to achieve here could have been achieved just sort of straight up, with more sort of single subject and transparent and straightforward language. And, I think it's just voters are skeptical after they read about this. But, the thing is, George, though, the masters of the universe, as I call it, the people out there with millions of dollars that are going to support or oppose this, which side would I rather be on? would rather be on the no side because there's so many things to go after, where the yes side, like, why should we vote for this? Okay, property tax relief for seniors. It's going to increase some funding for school districts. Well, what else? And they just have too much to defend, where there's too many other policy triggers out of this where you can be like, it's going to change this, it's going to change this, and it's going to change this. And those thises, that we spell out in our survey, people have pause about it and have concerns. There's no doubt about it. And that's what the survey measured.
It seems like there's going to be a vigorous effort to get this thing. And that was true of CC, by the way, back in the day, just a few years ago, where I think they outspent the opponents like 8-1 or something like that. It seems like the teachers union is going to show up big on this one, because they, of course, would like to see a lot more of these funds go to government. And I don't know what the other side is. I don't know what the Michael Fields Advanced Colorado Institute has under the hood to try to get the message out. But it sounds like, from your polling information, that an educated voter on HH is more likely to oppose it than support it.
I would call them a soft no right now, or an undecided more than anything. It's those unaffiliated voters. And that's the thing you really need to see. Like, Democrats, after everybody, says, hey, I'm going to support or oppose this, Democrat support only drops by 6 points. So 60% of Democrats support this. Now, granted, only 60% of Democrats support this. That support level really needs to be higher if you're on the yes side. Unaffiliated voters start at 50% and then drop to 39%.
Yikes.
Well, right. And they're the largest voting bloc in the sense of an odd year election. That's the other thing people need to understand. Younger voters are less likely to vote in an odd year election. Odd year elections are dominated by those seniors, 65 and older. And it's kind of more of all things equal among the party turnout. And that's very rarely does that change. And I doubt young voters are going to be, marching out there. And also, very few of them are homeowners anyway. So it's not like there's something in it for them, if you will, other than perhaps, a short-term bump in school funding which is, some people believe it. But that's the other thing, George, is that I reached out to school funding, professionals that really know this stuff. And they're like, Dave, we don't know what forecasts are going to be beyond 2 years. And we could go into a recession. And so all that money is going to kind of dry up. So it doesn't really matter anyways. This could be just a short-term sort of fix. And, with the school funding lobby, and, we're friends with many of them, and they're our clients, is that, to fund this, budget stabilization factor. And I know that's a scary word for your listeners, but basically, public education is underfunded going back for a long time. And many people support additional funding for public education, but to try to achieve it through Prop HH, what are people going to think? Like, oh, school districts are swimming in it now because of Prop HH, according from what they're going to learn, because they get 80 cents out of, versus 20 cents out of every dollar that the state is now allowed to retain, without getting into the weeds. But it just doesn't really get there, and it's unfortunate, in my opinion, because the school districts, Coloradans really do want to help them out, increase teacher pay, fully fund education. And you could have gotten there with a more of a straight up sort of ballot measure, or, what was Amendment 63 last year that didn't make it to the ballot, didn't get enough signatures, where 0.3% of all state funding that a state takes in could have gone into the state education fund. Anyways, I know we're not talking about state education policy here, but it's just, there's too much going on. And I think they're trying to help out too many constituencies at the same time in the name of saving property tax relief. And I just think this thing it's a Rubik's Cube, and people, when they don't know or are kind of confused, they're going to back off and say no.
I hope you're right on those things. And I'm a guy that's voted, by the way, for increased mill levies in Douglas County, where I live, because I'm in favor of funding education as well. We're talking with David Flaherty from Magellan Strategies. That thing that you talked about, hey, it's on the ballot this November, less, young people voter turnout and all that. I think folks ought to know too, it's got to be on this ballot. I mean, it can't be on this issue is like the only thing that a Tabor affecting thing can only be on this ballot in this odd year, where we're not having it contend with not only the presidential race, but also drawing more people out. So I think historically we've seen a difference in voter turnout. Do you have some sense of how different, like 5% less, 10% less, 100% less?
sure we do. We have it in our presentation, George. Just give me 1 second.
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
Because I wouldn't do my job well. I mean, just to give you a sense, like in the 2021 election, our last odd year election, just to give you an idea, looking at age, 36% of all the voters that cast a ballot of the 1.5 million in the 2021 election, 36% were seniors that are 65 and older. Those folks own homes,
Yeah.
But in a presidential year, that dropped down where seniors only made up 23% of all the votes.
Wow.
Cast.
Wow.
Now, those
More than
younger
a third
voters,
down to less than one quarter.
It's
Yeah.
a huge,
Wow.
yeah, it's a huge drop. Now, among those younger voters in 2021, 18 to 34, they only made up 14% of the vote. But in 2020, they made up 27% of the vote. So
almost double. Geez.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you have to really know and understand what the demographics are of really the 4 election cycles. And that's a big deal. And, partisanship also matters. Like Republicans, 31% in 2021. And even though they only make up 24% of current registration, in 2020, they made up 29%. So they're kind of stick around that, low 30, high 20 mark, if you will. But it's really those age ranges that I think are more relevant to HH just because there's such a strong correlation. If you're older, you're more likely to own a home. And if you own a home, you're looking for that property tax relief. However, it's not just a straight deal where it's like, yep, we're going to hold down the growth of your property taxes for 10 years. And let's just do that and live with it. And yes, rather than trying to say, but if you hold that down, that means less revenue for local governments and entities and such. So it really does matter. But so we'll just have to see. We're looking forward to polling this again.
I was going to ask you. That was my last question was, when are you guys going to do this again? When are you getting it out in the field?
Well, we're, George, like everybody, we're political observers here. I'm going to watch how the yes and no sides sort of make their arguments to Colorado voters. And we're going to do a survey right before the ballots are released in early October. And we'll see how the numbers move and what people think of HH. Obviously, a lot more people are going to be aware of it. And we'll measure support levels, and it'll be a different sort of survey just because we presume a lot more people will have paid attention and try to figure out what HH will do and if it's a winner for them or if it's something that they would rather take a pass on.
I would love to have you back on after the results of that get made public to have this conversation again and just kind of get updated on whether or not the needle has moved and in what direction.
Absolutely. No, we'd be happy to. And like we always do, we're very transparent with our polling and research. Anybody can go to our website, go to our blog page. It's all out there, the crosstabs, the open-ended verbatims. So that's the other thing, too. We ask people after the informed ballot, why are you voting yes and why are you voting no? And we have demographic information about those responses. And that's really, really where you get what we consider, the true intent behind these voters and where they're coming from. And it's across the board. There's all sorts of responses. Some are like, I don't like Tabor. It's defunded government, and I think it needs to be funded. I'm voting yes. And then you have, my dad's a fireman. This means less money for his fire district. I'm voting no. There's no way we're going to ever get the money back that, from this property tax cut. You have seniors being like property tax relief. You have people screaming loud and clear, defend Tabor, defend Tabor. And that's really the fun stuff that we really like to read through because it comes straight from the voters' intent, and there's no sugarcoating that. It's reporting the data. Anyways, strongly recommend if you really want to get a sense of where Coloradans feel about HH after we've kind of walked them through sort of a factual, look, this will happen, and this will happen, and see what they think.
David Flaherty from Magellan Strategy, sir, thanks for making time in your morning to talk with us about this thing. And I know it's accessible on the website. I'll try to drive people there.
Sure. Sounds good, George. And you have a wonderful weekend and look forward to talking to you again soon.
You too, sir. Talk to you soon. That was David Flaherty with Magellan Strategies. Look, we're going to cut away for a break. We're going to be joined again by Michael Fields. He's a buddy. He's also the president of Advanced Colorado Institute. He's a guy that's driving the opposition to Proposition HH. I imagine this polling has both good and bad things associated. We'll get caught up with him about that when we come back, but not before I tell you about Dan Caplis. Dan and Babar Wahid, his partner, they have a law firm, and that law firm really exists for a solitary purpose, and that is to, I'm going to use a really strong word here, but avenge victims. And I don't mean that in avenge like they're going to go seek some sort of retribution on the person that hurt them, but they are going to go seek compensation and justice for the things that happened to you. So if you find yourself, or you know someone that finds themselves in a situation where somebody has, God, my God, especially like the reckless and drunk drivers and the drugged drivers, which seem to be on our roads, you know that road deaths have gone up a ton this year in Colorado. If you know families impacted by that, there's a lot of numbers you can call and a lot of people who will promise you a lot of things. The only thing Dan's going to promise you is he is going to fight as hard and as long as you're willing to fight. And nothing comes out of your pocket, because it's all based on a contingency fee. He doesn't collect anything unless you collect something. And the reason for that is pretty clear, and that is he's not in it to make money. He's in it to help you to find that justice. And again, I wish I could tell you he could make all the pain go away. He can't make all the pain go away. He can't put everything back together. But what he can do is hold those people accountable, those trucking companies, those individuals, those corporations who took that away from you in the only way that's available in the civil justice system. So listen, look up Dan, DanCaplislaw.com, Dan, CAPLIS law.com. But I recommend giving his friendly folks a call there. Have that conversation with them. They can answer all your questions. They can put you in touch with Dan or Bobber. 303-770-5551, 303-770-5551. That's DanCaplislaw.com. When we come back, you, me, Michael Fields, 710 KNUS. George Brauchler right back with you here on the crazy train that is the George Show on 710 KNUS. No better bumper music for our next guest. His name is Michael Fields. He is the president of the Common. No, I'm sorry. You're not the president of anything common. You're the president of the Advanced Colorado Institute. Have they added any more titles to you yet, Michael?
No, not at this point.
Listen, thanks for figuring out a way to get coverage to be able to have this phone call. We had David Flaherty on. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to any of that interview, but there's a thing in the newspaper right now, Denver Gazette, that talks about polling on HH. Now, HH, we've had you on before to talk about, and I think everybody now knows it's an attempt by the Dems to blow up Tabor refunds in perpetuity in order to get just a teeny tiny little bit of tax relief. You're aware of the polling?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is that, it's clear, and we filed this lawsuit talking about the ballot language and how misleading it was. And I think the biggest takeaway was that, if you put the poll tested language, fluffy language that doesn't say anything out there, it gets 54%. If you explain it at all, it gets 44%. And I think that's the key to saying, this is obviously misleading. You look at it right now, if the election was today, it would pass, right, with 54%. So that's the negative. The positive is the more people hear about it, the more the numbers go down. And so, that gives us a clear path similar to Prop CC in order to try to defeat this thing.
Now, CC was another one that I know there were great efforts to defeat, and it was successful. Do you remember any polling like this that came out in advance? Was it similar, better, or worse?
Yeah, so if you look, Magellan did a poll, and they did it mid-August, so a little bit later on, and it was 54-30. So HH is in that same realm, but has 4 more points opposition to it already. And so it is, I think there's so many similarities to CC. You think about the fluffy ballot language. You think about this early polling that had it at 54%. You think about the fact that it has to do with Tabor refunds. And, this is going to be a campaign where there's a lot of money coming in favor of it. But the negative thing for them is just, it's never going to get better than the ballot language is, right? So you're going to run ads, you're going to do all this stuff. And it's like, the best way to describe it is what the ballot language has. And so it really is on the no side to get the word out, to share that message, what it's about, how it doesn't give a lot of property tax relief, how it's coming after Tabor refunds forever. It's on us to have the resources and to get that message out to inform people.
In terms of the spending on CC, what year was that, man? Was that 2019?
It was 2019.
2019. What was the spending like in favor and opposed to CC back in 2019?
Yeah, so it was about 7 million in favor and about 2 million opposed. So it was more than 3 times the amount was spent in favor. But these races, you think about odd year, and I know David talked about this a little bit. Odd year voters are very different. They're very in tune to what's going on, very motivated to learn about stuff. In odd year ballots, there's fewer things on the, you think that the election year when there's presidential, there's 10, 15 things on the ballot. There's going to be 2 things on the ballot this year, and the big one's going to be HH. And so it takes a little bit less money to get the word out to people you can target a little bit better. But they're very well informed, tend to be older voters, and they tend to vote no a lot. I mean, we've put stuff on in odd years that has gone down. It's hard to pass stuff in odd years.
What's the other thing on the ballot other than HH?
There was a retaining revenue on, I think it was marijuana, that it's going over the cap that was allowed, and so it's about $40 million, I think. So it was the controversy between II and HH. Remember which one was named which, and so it is a retaining additional revenue.
Have you noticed in the years that you've been doing this? And let me stop right there to ask, that polling group that doesn't seem to show up as much in the odd numbered years is 18 to 34 years old. Have you matured out of that age group yet?
I am. I'm above that.
So you're a predictable voter, thank God. In your years of doing this, do you see a trend with Colorado voters of voting no on constitutional amendments, kind of regardless of what there is? Is there a knee-jerk reaction for a certain percentage of the voting population?
I don't know. I mean, I think there is a knee-jerk reaction to vote no if people don't understand something, and that's the case with this measure. I think it was the case with CC. If people feel like they're trying to get tricked in some way, that it's not straightforward, It's just people, and you know this from polling stuff. It's like, if you're going to take a ballot measure to voters, you have to start out, typically 60% or higher. I mean, because the no vote, people are going to be bringing up, negatives about it. They're going to be talking about, all the details of it, et cetera. I would be very scared to bring anything that didn't have at least 60% at this point. So I'm surprised, these people, governor, the legislature, they all do their own polling too. And they knew that this was at about 54%.
Have you heard, by the way, through
through
your buddies, have you heard whether their polling is different than Dave's?
Yeah. The polling that I have heard is that it was almost exactly the same. And so they went forward with something they knew was at 54%, which again, it could still pass, right? And I can think of a couple ballot measures that started out low, had probably $12 million plus, and it got pushed over the top.
Ooh.
But just typically, you don't bring something that is in the lower 50s or 40s and think that you're going to pass it. But again, all of our work is in front of us. If we don't get the word out, this thing could pass. And so, I heard David say, he'd rather be the no than the yes side, but we have a ton of work in front of us, just like with CC. I mean, that was a lot of work, going around the state,
right,
trying to raise money, trying to get the word out. And it ended up going down by, 8 or 9 points. I don't think this one loses by that much, just because it has that property tax relief portion in there. But I would rather be us on the no side than the yes side.
We're talking with Michael Fields, president of Advanced Colorado Institute. When do you think this thing gets underway? When should we start seeing the first ads on TV or hearing them on this station? And how much do you think the other side is going to bring to bear on this?
Yeah, I think it'll probably be similar to the amount that they had for CC, maybe, $6 to $8 million. Largely coming from the teachers union, because this is again a measure that is an education funding measure, not a property tax relief measure, if they're trying to portray it. I think the other interesting thing though is that David talked about Democratic support and how it's not that high. It's hard to trick your base into, like, if the language says one thing, this is a property tax cut and we're going to vote on that, a lot of Democrats don't want any kind of tax cut. Right. And this is the problem that they're going to have, is they're going to have some people who are just like, and then you have some conservatives that just vote no on any tax increase. Right. And you have some liberals that vote no on any tax cut. So, even if people know at the Capitol, like, oh, this is really about taking Tabor refunds, it doesn't say that in the ballot language. So I think it hurts them with some Democrats. We have to get the word out to unaffiliated, to Republicans, basically saying this ends Tabor refunds. And that was something that's very popular, right? They just sent those checks out, $750 checks, Colorado cashback. When we were doing CC, this was hypothetical, right? There might be $300 million of Tabor refunds. We don't know. We haven't had Tabor refunds in a decade, and people still voted no. Now they have last year where they had $750 checks. That's the money they're coming after. I think our side, will have several $1 million. I don't know exactly what the numbers will be, but we'll get outspent. But again, the question is, do we have enough to get the word out to those voters who are going to vote in this election?
There some alternative initiative being floated? This is a text question that we got from a listener.
Yeah. So the problem that we have is, you have to, in odd years, you have to have either a tax increase or taking Tabor refunds. Those are the things that are allowed on the ballot. And we want to do a cap on property tax increases. And so we are getting signatures right now on a 4% annual cap, that statewide property taxes can't go up more than 4%, or go to the people in order to ask if they can keep the extra money, which, I think most of the time they're going to say no.
Yeah.
But
and that's exactly why the Dems hate it. They do not want voters to weigh in on taxes.
Yeah, because they would say, if it was right this year and it was like, do you want a 36% increase or a 4%? Like we know what they're going to say.
Yeah.
But that's letting voters decide. And so we're doing that for next year. So it would stop this from happening in the future, but it doesn't stop the immediate jump that we're going to see next year. The only way that stops is if the governor or the legislature calls special session and say, we're actually going to do property tax relief, not go after your Tabor refunds, not do HH. We're going to do actual property tax relief. For
folks to appreciate what the Tabor refunds are and could be, I mean, give us a sense of what we just saw. You talked about the $750 per person. What do we expect this year? What do you expect next year?
Yeah, so over $800 is the amount that would be for next year. And you think about this, again, when we were talking about it, it was $300 million. We're at $3.5 billion now, right? CC saved billions and billions of dollars and will in the future, especially if we can defeat HH. But CC, I think the two biggest ballot measures over the last few years economically were CC and the Gallagher repeal, right? And these are kind of going together in this measure, right? This is a response to what happened with Gallagher being repealed. That's why we have this increase. And then CC, they're coming right back after that same money. And so, we're going to see large TABOR refunds if we defeat HH. If we do not, it starts taking those away over time. And I think by 2027, we won't have TABOR refunds at all. So it's a billions and billions of dollar difference. 10 billion over 10 years is the amount of TABOR refunds they're going after.
Wow. Question from someone on YouTube here. Ask Michael if the property valuation reduction will apply to persons who own a second home.
Yeah, so it does, but the rate is a little bit higher for the people with a second home. And so they basically make you, apply and show what your first home is versus your second home, and they have different rates, just like the commercial side has different rates for different things. So it's very complicated. You can read through Senate Bill 303, breaks down all of the numbers over the years. And I think the key, though, is, year one, where this big spike happens, we're talking about a 0.06% cut, almost nothing. It's basically a rounding error. And that is so they can say we're reducing, property taxes in the ballot language. Like that's why it's there, when the real play is to go after the second part, right, which is the TABOR refund part, which they don't acknowledge. They call it state surpluses.
State surpluses. We just overpaid.
Well, think about it, but think, like, if you think, it's a state surplus, the money's just sitting there. Why not give it property tax relief, right? This isn't like we can't keep this money. This is TABOR refunds. They call it state surpluses because it sounds like it's government money that's sitting there. There's nothing to do but go and do property tax relief.
Final question. You said $800 per person. What happened to the 6-tiered approach to refunding things based on how much you contributed?
So they have that right now. But if HH passes, it changes it to a flat one for 1 year. So this is them trying to say, well, lower income people, you should vote in favor of HH because you'll get a bigger TABOR refund, right? And they do it for 1 year, which I think they'll come and pass and extend that they want flat TABOR refunds, but they withheld that this year to throw it in with HH to make the case that people need to vote for this in order to flatten out that refund.
Michael Fields, always a wealth of information and energy, man. Thanks for joining us from Advanced Colorado Institute today.
Thanks for having me on, George.
Thanks, buddy. Hey, listen, we're going to cut away for a break. We're going to come back. We got Ron from Englewood on the phone. I don't know how much time we'll have left, but I have to tell you before I break away, it's just the law around here about Gay Ribble and the Empower Home team. Here are some of the testimonials. They've done an excellent job throughout the entire process of selling our home. We sold our home within 5 days of listing and received above the listed price. The inspection, appraisal, and closing were effortless. Within 3 weeks of listing, we had our closing. This is a pleasant, efficient team to work with. I highly recommend them. Here's another. Gay was able to sell our home and help negotiate what we needed. She truly cares about her team and their success. We started off bumpy as we had a newer realtor initially, and Gay was open to hear us out, gave us her cell phone, and took over to ensure we sold our home and that our feedback was implemented across her team. I've got pages of this stuff, folks. I just can't read it all right now. But if you want to be one of those folks who thinks, dang, I could give the same kind of testimonial when I try to sell my home and move into another one, you're going to give Gay Ribble a call. First off, check her out at gayhasthebuyers.com, because she does over 14,000 of them. Gay, Gaye, hasthebuyers.com, or you can give her a call at 833-301-SOLD. That's 833. Got to use that number. 833-301-SOLD, 833-301-SOLD. That's Gay Ribble with the Empower Home team, Keller Williams. When we come back, Ron, the text, will wrap it up for today's show. It's George Brauchler on The George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brauchler back with you here on 710 KNUS. Final segment of the show. We've been overrun by smarty smart types from a place called Colorado Springs. If you know where that is, if you could text it in on a map, I'd love to know. I think it's a big city somewhere down south of us. I have for a long time, when I was the DA, touted Douglas County as the buffer protecting Colorado Springs from Denver. Listen, we're going to go right to the phone lines with the limited time that we have left. We're going to go to Ron from Englewood. You're on 710. Ron, what do you think?
Thank you, Colonel.
Yeah.
I'm not one of the smart guys from Colorado Springs.
What's going on?
I was watching the trial.
Yeah.
When a person that you had on the witness stand was very visible. I knew him.
Oh, really?
Only that he was my neighbor.
Wow.
He is the professor who hired and had to fire that monster. I just.
Do you remember that guy's name, your neighbor's name?
I'd rather not say it.
Well, the reason I ask is we had 3 professors that were also PhDs, doctors types, that he had to do labs with. There were 3 of them over the course of the year, and he ended up kind of boloing, screwing up on each of the 3. So it's one of those guys, but I appreciate you wanting to keep
them,
it. Yeah.
At the time, he had one of his kids was in elementary school, the other was in junior high school.
Oh, boy.
They both have since graduated from high school and college. Every summer, they have a party with their friends outside, the kids, and I never have been able to talk to him about it, but it's so close to each of us, some event in life. We don't realize. Yesterday, I spent the day on a Jeep trail with my son. Ironically, he has a functional neurological disorder.
Yeah.
And today, when I woke up and I heard you talking, I thought, wow, that day and those hours were just so special. And I grieve for this family. I'm looking at his house right now.
Yeah.
What they've gone through and what an anniversary means to them. Because he is the one that said, you're done.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope he does. I hope he doesn't wear any sense of guilt or responsibility, like he could have spotted this or done something about it. There was no chance this was going to happen.
Right. And I would imagine the effect on his family was he probably wouldn't let his kids watch the trial. And wouldn't you be worried maybe he would get out of jail someday?
Yeah, I would be, but I don't think that's going to happen. Ron, thank you for and forgive me. I've got 15 seconds left, man. Thank you for that call. I appreciate you finishing up the show that way. It is July the 20th. It's 11 years since that horrible thing. My thanks to Chief Dan Oates, Jaclyn Schildkraut, Teves, Flaherty, Fields. I'll be back on Monday. George Brauchler, 710, KNUS.